Advanced knowledge of the Mayan civilization. In the almost total isolation of the tropical lands of the Yucatán Peninsula, the Maya developed a science-based civilization more than 1,000 years before European explorers arrived, overlooking the emerald rainforest with their majestic skylines. Architectural wonders with magnificent carvings adorned with hieroglyphic inscriptions. These wonders were stunners. This sophisticated urban center was the largest on Earth during the middle of the first millennium AD. The sprawling Maya city-states conceived more than technologically stunning works of art and architecture, aiming to overwhelm observers with a sense of wonder. In addition to being centers of power, these cities were incubators of science and technology, places of learning, and hubs of commercial activity that generated wealth for the kingdom. Following the collapse of the Maya civilization, these magnificent cities persevered against all challenges for over a millennium. Due to the innovative Maya technology employed during their construction, the structures have remained intact, despite environmental degradation, the ravages of time, natural disasters, and the prying roots of the jungle. These brilliant societies developed scientific advances and technological methods of discovery that were a millennium ahead of those produced by European sciences to preserve their cities. Unlike in Europe, these societies created these technological advances without the influence of outside cultures, which makes them even more impressive. Maya cities were designed and built on a grand scale with functional efficiency and artistic elegance. Each city was a triumph of grace and power, with its monumental palaces and temples. There are no other architectural styles comparable to the Mayan style. Unlike any culture in Mesoamerica and any other world style of architecture, its inventive design is alien and bizarre. Where did this style originate? Their art style inspires their veneration of the cosmos and its impact on the Maya civilization's philosophy. Ancient Egypt had fewer cities and pyramids than the Mayan civilization, among history's longest-lived cultures. Over 50 independent city-states governed the Maya world, spreading over 125,000 square miles. For more than a millennium, royals, scribes, scientists, intellectuals, and merchants in Maya cities powered the Maya civilization. A society like this did not exist in the annals of lost prehistory for which historical dating had to be done scientifically. By deciphering the written inscriptions and using the precise calendar system of the Maya, we have established the chronology of historical events with some exactitude. Their unique writing style, once rediscovered, remained an unsolvable puzzle for a century. It was up to brilliant epigraphers to decipher the code and make it readable. A historical novel unfolds as the chronology of their events, epic adventures, and scientific messages unfolds. Throughout history, the world has become aware of the accomplishments and thoughts of this civilization. There is ample evidence that this culture achieved great things. Archaeologists have preserved classic period buildings with inscribed art integrated into their facades. Translations of Maya books and other written documentation have revealed additional Maya accomplishments. Academic research devoted to the Maya has primarily overlooked the technological achievements of Maya engineers, despite a continuing fascination with their accomplishments. Technological advances enabled the residents of the world's densest urban centers to survive, maintain excellent health, and live more comfortably. Maya society survived and thrived despite its unstable tropical environment, which included a lack of rainwater, poor soil conditions, and no access to surface water. Engineers in the Maya culture developed efficient water management systems and agricultural techniques that enabled their society to flourish despite shortfalls. During the 8th and 9th centuries, the Maya experienced their golden age. Ancient Egypt's classic period cities were characterized by dramatic architecture, with high-rise pyramids in brilliant colors and smooth stucco coated over grand plazas. Temples atop stepped pyramids towered above art-adorned palaces, universities, ball courts, and public buildings. These large city centers had artistically designed buildings and elevated paved roads, connecting them. there were many awe-inspiring cityscapes created during the classic period. Those who viewed the stunning art and architecture were intended to be astonished. The city's cityscape is dotted with paved routes that extend into the hinterland. The all-weather road system smoothed the way for travelers along the tangled and slick jungle floor. These roads served as intercity transportation systems for trade and communications with other city-states. They served as the city-state's politics, religion, education, science, and business centers. A Maya intellectual hierarchy maintained the state's wealth and quality of life for over 1,000 years. The Mayan culture has garnered significant attention since its rediscovery in the 19th century. Western nations are astonished by their achievements in astronomy, mathematics, calendrics, and written languages. The height of their culture saw the most advanced scientific and technological achievements on Earth. The ancient Egyptians used hieroglyphs for their writing. The Greeks developed advanced sciences. The Romans built well-drained, paved highways. And the Phoenicians traded long distances via seagoing vessels. During the Mayan era, written almanacs of solar and lunar cycles were created, which contained accurate predictions of eclipses and charts of Venus, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. They could calculate the time of Earth's revolution around the Sun more accurately than most modern scientific instruments. The Mayan mathematical system was unique and well-suited for calculating large-array numbers. Maya mathematics used a base of 20 rather than 10, as used in European mathematics, and enabled the calculation of massive numbers using only 3 symbols, in addition to the fundamental functions. Positional mathematics helped them calculate numbers with magnitudes in the hundreds of trillions. Their mathematical system is flexible and exquisite for large magnitude astronomical and minute calculations used in practical applications such as bookkeeping, census-taking, record-keeping, and engineering calculations. Roman, Greek, and Egyptian mathematical systems paled compared to the Maya mathematical system. Furthermore, these other mathematical systems restricted their operations to positive numbers. 1,100 years before European mathematicians, the Maya understood the concept of zero and the computation of extensive array calculations in the negative range. The Maya script is considered one of the world's most visually distinctive writing systems. It is one of 5 original written languages developed by this brilliant civilization. Through its intricate and artistic flow, the characters created an art form that allowed them to report anything they could speak. In the narratives, the scribes did not simply jot down their observations. Astronomy, mathematics, and calendrics were tied together by the Maya script. Maya scribes were of royal lineage and participated in decision-making as part of the royal family. In addition to chronicling the Maya history and managing city-state correspondence, these masters of the written word authored thousands of books dealing with a wide variety of subjects, including history, royal lineage, astronomy, mathematics, calendrics, technology, medicine, law, ritual, music, and the natural history of plants and animals. While Europe struggled through the Dark Ages, Maya arts and sciences flourished from AD 250 to AD 900 during the Classic period. London was a swampy river trading town with 9,000 inhabitants, while the Maya lived in their big cities with 100,000 inhabitants. Scientists, the America's first engineers, achieved astronomical and mathematical knowledge, developed efficient water management and infrastructure systems, created land and water transportation systems, and developed productive agricultural systems to trump the environment and enhance the city-state's wealth. The Maya accomplished such lofty goals, but how did they do it? Why did they seek knowledge? Where did their success come from? Home cooking is the answer. A form of cultural self-determination motivated by the need to survive their complex tropical environment while remaining focused on the heavens. Maya sciences and Mesoamerican influence. A geographical area of Central America shaped like an amoeba is called Mesoamerica. Culturally, this area extends from the northern Mexican highlands southward to the rainforests of Honduras and includes the Maya homeland on the Yucatán Peninsula. In this area, pre-Columbian cultures in the Americas were the most complex and advanced. Mesoamerica is considered one of the cradles of civilization, along with Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China. Mesoamerican cultures predated or paralleled the ascendancy of the Maya as the area's dominant culture. Other civilizations developed in Mesoamerica, including the Olmec, Zapotec, Toltec, Teotihuacan, and Aztec. A high degree of interaction between regional cultures resulted in the Maya sharing common traits with other cultures. Long-distance trade facilitated the spread of cultural concepts and ideas throughout Mesoamerica rather than conquest traditions. In addition to these basic Mesoamerican concepts, the Maya developed advanced scientific and technological disciplines. It was not the advent of the Olmec culture in 1500 BC that led to the emergence of Mesoamerican civilization, but the influence of multiple native cultures. Researchers have referred to the Olmec culture as Mesoamerica's mother culture because of its long-range impact. Despite commonality, Mesoamericans exhibit a remarkable diversity of languages, politics, economics, social organization, art, styles, and other aspects of their lives. Their art forms are unique, from the carving of jadeite figures and jewelry to the sculpture of giant stone heads. The 260-day ceremonial calendar, writing, and lapidary skills are obvious examples of their influence on the Maya. The Mesoamerican and Mayan worlds were quite different. In central Mexico, a single major city controlled a sprawling empire of many political states. These metropolitan centers ruled vast expanses of their domains as imperial capitals. Imperial political organizations included the Teotihuacan Empire, which dated from the same period as the Maya Classic period, the Toltecs, and the Aztec Empire, which flourished centuries after the decline of the Maya. Unlike the empire builders, the Maya followed a different political philosophy. Their political organization was small, independent polities. Among the Maya, a sovereign city-state emphasized individuality as the primary political unit. Tens of thousands lived in their city-states' urban centers, including the elite ruling classes, scientists, merchants, engineers, artisans, and other specialists. Most people lived in the hinterlands, outlying agricultural areas, and scattered villages. Mesoamerica had already begun cultivating domestic agricultural products and applying creative agronomy by 8000 BC. Mesoamerican cultures developed various agricultural products and efficient farming methods, which the Maya enhanced. During the Classic period, agricultural innovations resulted in the rich harvests of the Classic period. Diverse and sophisticated Maya agricultural techniques enabled them to overcome adverse environmental conditions and enhance food production. Innovative designs are permanent raised fields, terracing, aquaculture, canal irrigation systems, and wild harvesting. In addition to providing a surplus of food for trading, these systems proved critical in supporting the large city populations during the Classic period. Mesoamerica's primary agricultural product was maize. Still the nation's leading food staple today, around 4000 BC, Mesoamericans domesticated maize through selective cultivation. Teosinte is the plant that propagates maize, entirely dependent on human agronomy. Researchers have found an ancient pollen grain from maize, 7,000 years old, in Tabasco, and one from the Maya domain, 5,000 years old. Mayan agronomists enhanced maize varieties, resulting in many cultivars that helped them expand their agriculture. Agriculture has played a crucial role in the growth of flourishing civilizations. Technology-enabled agriculture reduced the distance between cultivation points and the marketplace, while allowing an abundant harvest. This enabled feeding a large population while producing a surplus of food. As a result, food could be traded freely, leading to an economic boom. The Mesoamerican way of life was characterized by a great variety of foods. These included agricultural products, domesticated animals, and games. In addition to maize, beans, tomatoes, chili peppers, squash, avocados, papayas, guavas, yams, maniocs, amaranth, vanilla, plums, achiote, zapote, annona, peanuts, pineapple, sweet potatoes, sunflowers, cacao, and fruit of the ramon tree were grown. Mesoamericans could domesticate various animals, including ducks, turkeys, dogs, and stingless bees. Mesoamericans supplemented their diet with wild water and land animals. These animals included deer, peccaries, armadillos, manatees, tapirs, rabbits, monkeys, fowl, fish, turtles, caimans, insects, and iguanas. Mesoamericans relied heavily on dogs as a source of protein. Maya's agricultural genius changed eating habits around the world. The conquistadors brought these Maya foodstuffs to Europe and Asia, changing the tastes of many countries. Today, Maya agriculture still benefits us. How would Thai, Indian, and Chinese cuisine change if chili peppers disappeared? The agricultural legacy of our Maya ancestors is clearly visible in the aisles of a modern supermarket. The Maya offer a wide variety of foodstuffs as commercial offerings, including tomatoes, squash, chili peppers, beans, avocado, sweet potato, papaya, chocolate, peanuts, vanilla, pineapple, jicama, and sunflower seeds. There were no beasts of burden in Native American fauna, such as cows, horses, and donkeys. As a result of the lack of work animals, Maya technology developed, utilizing the workforce for transportation, lifting, and carting. Maya sciences were influenced by the natural environment. The diversity and demands of their natural environment greatly influenced Maya civilization and its technological developments. To Maya engineers, interactions between the lithosphere, biosphere, and hydrosphere presented unique and complex challenges. Technical solutions to adverse environmental conditions enabled the Maya civilization to flourish and their cities to survive. The geography of the Maya world partially influences its climate. The Maya zone lies in some of the most diverse terrains in the tropics, with the Yucatán Peninsula constituting the prominent geographical feature of their domain. It extends northward from the Mid-America Isthmus, forming a landmass that separates the Gulf of Mexico from the Caribbean Sea. Geographically, the Yucatán Peninsula consists of a large flat shelf of karstic limestone that extends along a north-south axis from the base of massive volcanic mountains. Rainforests in the lowlands enjoy a hot tropical climate, whereas volcanic mountains in the south have a temperate climate. Unique rainfall patterns further enhance climate diversity. The Maya world experiences some of the heaviest annual rainfall in the tropics. The 6-month rainy season accounts for about 75% of the total rainfall. The dry season is characterized by low precipitation, which creates a seasonal desert. Throughout the year, the Maya experienced deluges and droughts. Maya cities and civilizations generally needed a reliable water source year-round to survive, and they had to manage this water resource efficiently. The geology and hydrology of the Yucatán Peninsula complicated the climatic ranges and precipitation extremes. Geologically, the Yucatán is composed of karstic limestone, a porous material that absorbs surface water directly, which is drawn into an aquifer and lacks surface water on the Maya landscape. Most of the Maya population lacks a natural water source during the dry season due to the near absence of rivers and lakes. Chicxulub crater is an impact crater formed by an extraterrestrial object 65 million years ago. The northern Yucatán is experiencing a rare anomaly in surface water availability. Water from surface wells at the northern end of the Yucatán platform is a unique characteristic of the geological substrate in the north. Stress fractures create concentric rings of natural wells or cenotes among the limestone. The Maya in the northern lowlands had direct access to these natural water sources. Thousands of people lived in the classic Maya cities. A reliable water source for agriculture and drinking was crucial to the survival of these cities. In other parts of the world, civilizations often built their cities near bodies of fresh water and relied on reliable water resources. However, natural sources of free-flowing surface water were not available in the Maya world. This paradox was exacerbated by the unpredictable rainfall and the unstable environment. Maya engineers developed ingenious solutions to these challenges. Due to the fluctuating rain and the seasonal desert, they developed water management systems to ensure a year-round supply of potable water in the cities and irrigation water for agricultural use. The limestone under the Maya world provided unlimited building materials for their cities thanks to its sedimentary nature. This sedimentary rock does not contain any metal ore deposits. Igneous rock deposits may contain valuable minerals in the southern volcanic areas and tectonic plates extending across the isthmus. The Maya lacked metal ore. They used minerals from the volcanic region and tectonic plates to craft tools. These two minerals have more complex properties than steel. Jadeite and obsidian were deposited in volcanic belts and tectonic fault lines. Maya technicians recognized their unique characteristics, which made them suitable for fabricating specialized tools. In this case, the lack of metal ores was used as a positive. Jadeite and obsidian were fashioned into specialized tools. Civilizations of the Mayas. Agronomist farmers domesticated maize in 8000 BC, marking the beginning of culture and its significant achievements. During the Classic period, there was no overnight rise in Maya power, intellectualism, art, and wealth. The rediscovered Maya civilization in the mid-19th century shocked the academic world and rewrote history. 20,000 BC to 8000 BC. During the last ice age, hunters and gatherers of Siberian origin crossed the frozen Bering Sea and settled in America. During this time, wild horses, giant ground sloths, and mammoths roamed the North American continent. A natural expansion into new areas, not a deliberate migration southward, attracted the migrants. As a result of their migration to southern Mesoamerica, a tribe of nomadic hunters whose descendants would form the basis of the Maya civilization settled. This was the start of the Mayan civilization. 8000 BC to 2500 BC is the Archaic period. Ancient agricultural techniques were first developed by the Proto-Mayas. Among their most significant achievements was domesticating maize. Maize is derived from teosinte, a wild native grass cultivated by Maya agronomists. Recent genetic evidence suggests that maize was domesticated nearly 8,000 years ago. Various agricultural products enhanced the Mayan diet, including maize, which thrived in the Maya world's ecosystem. Among the Mayas' agricultural practices was the skillful domestication of animals and plants, which increased agricultural productivity. Maya culture developed due to this abundant food supply, which helped them settle down, adopt a sedentary lifestyle, advance their culture, and stabilize their population. Villages and towns arose as a result of sedentary lifestyles and abundant agriculture. These settlements became the center of society as they emerged. With an increase in population, the establishment of towns enabled the emergence of industry and trading skills, which enhanced the development of their technical arts. The technical arts flourished, creating a new class of artisans who developed weaving, basketry, stylized pottery, and specialized tool-making techniques. As a result of these new industrial products and the surpluses of agricultural products, a merchant class was formed, and there was an opportunity for long-distance trade routes to other parts of Mesoamerica. 1200 BC to 250 AD, the pre-classic period. During the pre-classic period, the Maya expanded rapidly. On the other hand, the Olmec civilization decayed during this time, during which the Mayans had close contact. With their intricately carved jadeite jewelry, massive stone monuments, and buildings of giant earthen pyramids, the Olmecs influenced the emerging Maya culture. In addition to the written script, The Olmecs had a 260-day calendar. During the pre-classic period, the Maya civilization arose in the southern highlands and the northern lowlands. Nakbe, El Mirador, and Cheros were among the earliest Maya cities. These early cities set the trend for life in urban places and monumental architecture, such as platforms and pyramids with exotic artwork. Many Maya cities became prominent during the mid and late pre-classic periods and eventually became archetypes of the classic period. As they expanded, the city's architecture and monumental art grew in sophistication and size. It had all the characteristics of a classic period Maya city, including pyramids over 70 meters high, whose stairways were flanked by giant carved masks of the gods, massive architectural wonders connected by paved roads, sac-biobs, and monumental stelae depicting historical figures. The construction incorporated a deep red stucco finish. A classic Maya city would have all of these features. However, El Mirador did not survive into the classical period and was abandoned in AD 150, more than a century before the start of the classical period. We have established classic Maya cities like Tikal as prototypes. The oldest of the Maya classic period cities, Tikal is located in modern Guatemala. At Tikal, inscriptions dating from AD 292 have been deciphered. From 250 to 900 AD, there was the classic period. The classic period is considered the golden age of Mesoamerican culture, during which the Maya reached the height of their scientific, technological, and artistic achievements. Teotihuacan bloomed during this period, encompassing the emergence of a vast empire from their capital on the central Mexican plateau and the peak of Maya civilization. As Teotihuacan ascended, Maya scientific civilization and powerful Maya city-states to the south also peaked. At its height, Teotihuacan culture influenced the Maya's style of art and architecture, even though it lacked scientific knowledge and a written script. Although Teotihuacan established colonies in the Maya heartland, it also interacted with the Maya and disseminated knowledge. The 7th century saw the burning, sacking, and abandonment of the great city. At the city. This was possibly due to the barbarians at the gate syndrome. The demise was unexpected. New technology was developed to implement the design and construction of public buildings and the efficient infrastructure for the burgeoning urban power centers during the classic period. City-states became rich and powerful due to the engine of big business. Large seagoing cargo vessels were designed and constructed, enhancing long-range trade activities. Maya roads connected traders to distant cities, and cargo vessels transported goods to trading partners throughout the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean Sea, and the Pacific Ocean. Maya city-states were formed during the Classic period. The 125,000 square mile Maya area contained more than 50 city-states. Some cities were more significant, powerful and sophisticated than others, with more influence. The larger Classic period cities affected the cultural, scientific, and technical advances of the Classic period Maya culture more. With their immense wealth, the leading cities grew in size and influence, giving them enhanced commercial power and the ability to establish large universities offering a broad range of courses. In addition to their more extensive trade networks, political influence and dominance, more powerful cities such as Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, and Copán promoted scientific knowledge dissemination. Within the Maya city-states, the Classic period was a time of politics, social interaction, and interactions with other city-states. Because of this, cities became hubs for government, learning centers, scientific research centers, and technological development centers. A densely populated Classic period power center needs resources to support its activities. Specialized buildings were required as part of urbanization. Large buildings, called palaces, in the ruins of Maya cities were just that. These buildings served other vital functions such as royal residences, governmental offices, theological seminaries, observatories, and centers for technical and commercial functions. Engineers in Maya societies were responsible for urban centers' planning, design, construction, and operation. Historically, classic period cities are defined as grandiose metropolises, with large populations, monumental art, and structures adorned with artwork and carved inscriptions that chronicled the history of the ruling elite, detailing heroes and villains, victories and defeats. Pyramids towered high above the plazas of classic period cities. More than half of these skyscrapers reached a height of more than 250 feet. Until the late 19th century, towers built in large American cities dwarfed the height of high-rise buildings in jungles. It is unknown how many people lived in large classic period cities. Scholars have used the remnants of dwellings in the urban area to estimate the population. For instance, scholars estimated the population of Tikal to be 100,000. The city had a population density of 2,500 people per square mile based on its urban area. One of the most densely populated regions of the pre-industrial world was the Maya. Due to these high population densities, significant engineering efforts were necessary to plan, design, and build the buildings, efficient water management systems, and efficient infrastructure needed to sustain a prosperous and viable lifestyle. Agriculture, diverse industries, and long-range trade networks enabled city-states to build a rich political environment. The classic period also marked the beginning of the modern era. The classical world was fertile for science and technology, with power and wealth. During the classic period, the Mayas' scientific and technological achievements predate those of European scientists by 1,000 years. Classical period decline. Throughout history, there have been powerful empires. These civilizations rose to power and produced high levels of knowledge, science, and philosophy. Then each of the all-powerful states declined. Elite and educated classes in these empires disintegrated, and their massive cities were abandoned and eventually decayed. Most recently, we observed the same pattern of decline in Egypt, Greece, the Roman Empire, the Indus Valley, Persia, and the Soviet Empire. The golden age of the Maya began in the 9th century and mysteriously ended. Before the classic period, the Maya flourished for over 3,000 years and enjoyed 600 years of unparalleled enlightenment and prosperity. The Maya civilization of the classic period mysteriously declined as the 10th century approached, and their splendid cities were abandoned and surrendered to the encroaching rainforest. Based on a chronological analysis of the collapse of the classic period Maya cities, these power centers were systematically abandoned over 100 years. Between AD 822 and AD 910, the classic period cities erected monuments. Inscribed on monuments are dates that indicate the end of cities from the classical period. According to paleoclimatic and meteorological records from this period, the Maya society collapsed because of a natural disaster and an inability to cope. It has been observed by scholars that the demise of the classic period cities and the death of the Maya civilization were not due to the barbarians at the gates syndrome, slave revolts, or invasion on the part of outside forces, but to an apocalyptic environmental disaster, and the inability of Mayan technology to cope with Mother Nature's whims. Post-classical period. In the 11th century, several Maya cities rose from the ashes. This is known as the post-classic period. A significant cultural influence from central Mexico led to the rebirth and dominance of towns in the northern lowlands, including Uxmal, Mayapan, and Chichen Itza. During this time, the Toltec culture from central Mexico ruled over a militaristic epoch. The Toltec and Maya cultures combined to create a composite art and architectural style that reflected both Maya and Toltec styles. Those cities flourished for about a millennium after AD 1200. As a result, this last remnant of Mayan civilization also crumbled. The Aztec Empire rose to power in the 13th century and eventually dominated Mesoamerica. including the Mayan region. Maya universities and their scientific heritage did not survive into the post-classic period. However, the collective knowledge inscribed by the Maya intellectual elite in thousands of classic period Maya books was preserved and copied by Maya scribes, even well into the post-classic period. Conquest of Spain. Spanish conquest extinguished the cultures of Mesoamerica, including the dominant Aztecs and the repressed Maya. Before Hernán Cortés landed on the Mexican coast, the Maya classic period and their scientific civilization had collapsed more than 6 centuries ago, and the ancient cities were eroded by time and jealously hidden by a cloak of rainforest tendrils. These ruins and the resplendent artwork did not interest the conquistadors. They sought gold and treasure. The Maya elite carefully protected thousands of books about their scientific civilization. After surviving hundreds of years beyond the classic period, Spanish colonial governments and the Church destroyed these priceless treasures of scientific knowledge between 1563 and 1697. Over time, the colonial government suppressed all outside references to the lost cities of the Maya. Before the Mexican Revolution in 1820, Spain prohibited exploring ancient towns. Today's Maya. Although the Mayan civilization has faded into history, the Mayan people have not. Millions of Mayans continue to practice the Mayan people's distinctive culture, beliefs, traditions, and language today in Mexico and Central America. During archaeology digs, archaeologists uncover the ruins of ancient cities constructed by these Maya ancestors, rekindling their pride in their heritage. Codices and their mysteries. Maya codices span 500 years of discovery and are complicated by the Spanish conquest, the severity of the Spanish Inquisition, the neglect of the Bourbon kings, colonial Spain's xenophobia, and the jungle that hid Maya ruins. Before the conquistadors landed on the coast of Mexico, the Maya cities had been buried beneath the lush vegetation of the tropical jungle for 6 centuries. After their collapse, the outside world would take a millennium to learn of their existence. Solving the riddle of Maya achievements would require another century. Breaking the Mayan code revealed the profound truths of their philosophy, history, and scientific achievements. During the conquest, the royal chronicles of Spain, which were meticulously transcribed by the priests and conquistadors, did not include narratives or illustrations of the magnificent pre-Columbian cities. Cortés's letters to the Spanish royal court and King Carlos V offered only offhand references to the cities. The only reference to pre-Columbian architecture compared the streets of Tenochtitlan to Madrid's streets and the Templo Mayor to the Cathedral of Seville. A letter from Cortés's captain, Bernal Díaz del Castillo, describes Tenochtitlan's sacred precinct as a vast enclosure of courts larger than Salamanca's plaza. The remarks from Cortés and del Castillo represent the only descriptions of pre-Columbian cities recorded by the conquistadors. European images of the Aztec city are based chiefly on first-hand accounts, which led to misconceptions about its configuration. Sketches and detailed narratives did not describe the most magnificent living city of the New World until relatively recently. The hard-bitten conquistadors and overzealous priests, who eventually came to rule the Maya world, were primarily responsible for this lack of interest in art and architecture. New Spain's south did not contain any ruins of Maya cities described in the correspondence of the conquistadors. The ruins of the Maya civilization were of little interest to Francisco de Montejo, governor and captain general of the Yucatán. Spanish courts could not enrich themselves from the abandoned Maya cities. Franciscan priests knew about Maya cities well. However, priests brought their own religion to Yucatán, dedicating themselves to the destruction of the Mayan religion and the conversion of the Mayans to Catholicism. Colonizers' only interest in the fate of the ruined cities was to demolish pagan carvings, demolish monumental Maya structures, and use the stone quarries for churches and municipal buildings. The ancient Maya stones were used to construct new buildings in the Maya city of Tho, now known as Mérida, the capital of Yucatán state, and at Izamal, a major Maya religious destination converted into a Christian center by the Spaniards. Maya masons used their jadeite tools to construct the massive Cathedral de San Ildefonso at Mérida and other vital structures in these new cities. The conquistadors commingled with them in demolishing Maya cities and even destroyed Maya books containing a sophisticated society's scientific and intellectual legacy. The king's uneducated band of soldiers had no interest in the art or architecture of pre-Columbian cultures. As educated men of God, the Franciscan priests should have shown some interest in the artistic treasures. The exclusive spiritual monopoly in the Yucatán came from the Spanish crown to the Franciscan order. The Franciscan order planned to convert the Maya from their indigenous religion to Catholicism. However, the Spanish Inquisition was at its height, and its pitiless and brutal mandates were woven into the conversion process. To save the souls of the Maya under the care of the Franciscan priests, they were sometimes directed to use cruel methods by the rabid religious fanatic Bishop Diego de Landa. In history, de Landa would be remembered for two acts: burning the surviving Maya books at Mani and writing the ethnographic masterpiece Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán. During the 16th century, the Maya were still reproducing books initially written during the Classic period, almost a millennium before the conquest. Maya literati wrote books that permanently recorded the division's learning, history, and science. A generation of Maya scribes still wrote in 1534, protecting, copying, and updating the texts that had survived before the conquest. Contemporary Spanish reviewers, including de Landa, recognized the Maya manuscripts as valuable historical and scientific records. Alonso de Zorita wrote in 1540 that he reviewed many books that recorded Maya history up to 800 years ago, which were interpreted for him by elderly Mayas who wrote the script. Franciscans considered Maya books to be devil's work. From 1562 to 1697, when the last Maya stronghold fell, thousands of books were seized and destroyed by zealous priests. It took a long time and a fierce fight for the Maya world to be overthrown by Spanish weapons. Approximately 180 years after Hernán Cortés landed in Veracruz, Mexico, the last Maya city fell in Tayasal, Guatemala, 1697. At that time, the scribes were in Guatemala. Churches and buildings were built on the site of Tayasal using stones from the razed city of Tayasal, which was used as a quarry for the construction of Flores, Guatemala. It is impossible to estimate how many Maya books were burned in the name of Christianity, but only 4 Maya books, which are now known as codices, were known to have survived the zealous priests. De Landa oversaw the burning of Maya books in the summer of 1562. In May that year, Franciscan priests discovered that certain Mayas in the Yucatan town of Man had reverted to their traditional religion. As soon as de Landa arrived in Man, he began an episcopal inquisition. Inquisition methods included interrogating suspected heretics using various forms of torture. In July, de Landa performed what is known as an auto da fe, or act of faith, during which he burned all Maya codices he could find and 5,000 works of art. According to his report, 27 scrolls were burned, but other witnesses stated that 99 times as many were destroyed. The fanatical religious activity of de Landa was continued by the destruction of books and the torture and execution of Maya by burning them alive, hanging or drowning after the incident at Man. De Landa's widespread use of torture troubled the Spaniards of the time. In addition, the Church became concerned that de Landa had exceeded his authority by conducting an illegal inquisition. In 1563, Bishop Francisco de Toral summoned de Landa back to Spain to answer for his actions before the Council of the Indies. It took 9 years for the trial to conclude. The problem took 9 years to solve. The test took 9 years to finish. De Landa was severely condemned by the Council of the Indies. The Church eventually assembled a committee of doctors to judge de Landa's actions. The committee investigated his alleged crimes and found de Landa not guilty, leading to his acquittal. De Landa wrote the classic work Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, account of the affairs of Yucatán, during his 9 years in Spain, defending himself against his accusers. De Landa was deeply interested in Mayan culture despite his overt acts of cruelty toward his converts. During his relationship with the Maya, he learned some secrets enshrined in their books. After gaining their confidence, he conducted extensive interviews with Maya experts. In addition to becoming familiar with the Maya hieroglyphic script, he also learned about their calendars. He evidently kept notes from his interviews and other materials to write his manuscript. Speculated that he may have carried back to Spain. On the sea voyage, a Maya codex hidden in his file of source material to answer his accusers. A copy of de Landa's manuscript is believed to be the most crucial document written about the Mayas' everyday life in Yucatán. In narrative and hieroglyphic form, he describes the 260-day Maya calendar, with the names of the days of the month and the months of the 360-day solar year. It also explained the logic of the Maya writing system. The declaration of his innocence led to his elevation to the 4th Bishop of Yucatán, where he spent the remainder of his life. The role of de Landa in history is both famous and infamous. His infamy stems from the destruction of Maya codices, while his fame came from his Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán book, which would one day lead to revolutionizing the study of the ancient Maya and breaking the Maya hieroglyphic code. But fate intervened in the attempt to unravel the mystery of the Maya. De Landa's manuscript was buried in the uncatalogued clutter of the Royal Academy in Madrid, and has since been lost for 3 centuries. Discovery and the xenophobia of New Spain. Europe published several volumes describing travel adventures in New Spain during the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. These volumes have a false narrative and fanciful depictions of pre-Columbian architecture. They did not have first-hand experience of the New World, as they did not travel there. Carved details in pre-Columbian cities reflected Greek, Roman, and French influences. Spain's xenophobia, limited exploration of the colonies and foreigners were practically forbidden from entering New Spain's ports. Protestants faced prohibition from entering the colonies. Generally, pre-Columbian art and architecture images appear in European publications due to minimal descriptions of pre-Columbian cities from conquerors' letters and accounts. Continually looking for European roots in pre-Columbian civilizations was their goal. The Bourbon dynasty ruled Spain from 1700 to the present. Almost 250 years after the conquest, when Charles III took over Spain, he embarked on an enlightenment and administrative reform policy that reversed Spain's decline as a colonial power. His interests in learning and science led him to find scientific significance in the culture of indigenous peoples in the Spanish colonies. He encouraged exploring his colonies and exploiting their natural resources to increase the crown's revenue. This interest in the culture of New Spain prompted the first explorations of ancient Maya cities. The formation of an expedition to the site, led by a local priest, was followed by reports of an abandoned city near the village of Palenque, in the province of Ciudad Real of Chiapas. Father Ramón Ordóñez de Aguilar explored the site in 1773 and reported his findings to the Royal Audiencia of Guatemala. The news of discovering a lost city in the rainforest traveled to the royal court in Madrid and reached King Charles III. The royal court ordered an investigation of the ruined city. This discovery attracted his attention and fostered the enlightened atmosphere of seeking scientific truths when Guatemala was ceded to Mexico by Mexico in 1824. José Estecheria, president of the Royal Audiencia, ordered a detailed exploration of Santo Domingo de Palenque to fulfill the king's wishes. José Antonio Calderón's initial report in 1784 was considered unsatisfactory. 1785 Estecheria sent royal architect Antonio Bernasconi to Palenque for further examination. Reports and illustrations included in the second expedition apparently had severe flaws and were considered unsatisfactory. In 1786, Estecheria was fortunate to commission Don Antonio del Rio, a captain of the dragoons, and Guatemalan artist Ricardo Almendares to explore the site and prepare a comprehensive report. Estacheria's choice of this talented team enhanced his chances of success. Using his talents as a writer and artist, he prepared an accurate and informative report. Captain Del Rio led an expedition ordered by King Charles III to reach the site on May 3, 1787. Navigating the site was difficult due to dense fog and the impenetrable rainforest covering the buildings. Del Rio hired 79 men from the nearby village of Tumbala to clear the area. Using axes, the team felled trees and exposed the city's ruins as they began. Father Thomas de Souza, a Franciscan priest, was present when Del Rio was there. During the conversation, the priest described other ruined cities he had observed while traveling in Yucatán. During the discussion, the priest told of other ruined cities he had observed while traveling in the Yucatán. As they spoke, the priest described other ancient ruins he had observed while traveling in the Yucatán. Captain Del Rio noted these other ruins in his report. When he compared some of the sculptures to Greek prototypes, his writing became a narrative of his observations of the ruins, rather than a description of his words. He made a quantum leap of consciousness when describing specific symbology carved into monuments. He surmised that these symbols were hieroglyphs that had special meaning in the original native language based on his observations. Based on his words, he correctly identified the symbols as written languages and as indigenous peoples' work. Del Rio's expedition to Palenque produced a collection of artifacts from the site and an insightful report, which included accurate descriptions of the city and its monuments and illustrations by Ricardo Almendares. By introducing classical European art and architecture into his paintings, Almendares's illustrations strayed from accuracy, reflecting the classical education he received. The report and artifacts were submitted to Estacheria on June 24, 1787. Several copies were made and deposited in the Madrid and Guatemala city archives. Spanish bureaucrats' xenophobia and isolationism buried the report deep in the archives. Captain Del Rio's erudite report was the first attempt to accurately assess a classic Maya city. The paper also suggested that the symbols carved on the ruins were written script, attributed the source of the art and architecture to indigenous culture, and reported the existence of other lost Maya cities. As a last effort by the Spanish crown, King Charles IV conducted the most extensive survey of pre-Columbian cities in 1807. 3 expeditions were undertaken, following the king's desire to learn more about the colony of New Spain and its natural resources. José Luciano Castañeda accompanied Captain Dupuy on these expeditions. They made an excellent team. Dupuy was a passionate aficionado of pre-Columbian architecture, and Castañeda was the artist at the National Museum in Mexico City. The expeditions visited Palenque, Mitla, Tula, and Monte Alban. Despite Dupuy's reliance on visual evidence, he maintained that the cities had been built by a culture unknown to European scholars. Ancient cultures created works without the help of foreigners. Castañeda's illustrations of the sites were more accurate than previous artists. In addition to 150 drawings, he produced the most comprehensive visualization of pre-Columbian art and architecture ever compiled. Castañeda's classical education frequently led to distortions and errors in his works. Dupuy did not credit the indigenous people living in the area of the sites with building the ruined cities. He asserted that ancient people who were extinct created monuments. Dupuy lamented, ending his report with only conjectures about the origin of the ruins. Yet, his assertion that people of independent American origin built the ruins provided the basis for future explorations. A copy of the report was sent to the National Museum of Mexico City in 1808. Eventually, it was reported that it had been lost in the chaos of the Mexican Revolution. Recovering the report was fortunate. Spain began to lose control of its colonies in 1810, and in 1821, with the signing of the Treaty of Córdoba, The Spanish crown admitted defeat and recognized Mexico as an independent nation. The fall of the Spanish Empire paved the way for the country's exploration, excavation of its ruins, and publishing of pre-Columbian scholarships. Nearly 40 years after Del Rio's report was completed, a copy was hidden in the Royal Archives in Guatemala City and eventually found its way to British publisher Henry Berthoud. Berthoud claimed the report was collected from Guatemala's archives and stored legally. The English translation and heavy rewriting of Captain Del Rio's report left the original document barely recognizable. It was published in 1822 under Description of the Ruins of an Ancient City. The volume also included an essay by Dr. Paul Felix Cabrera of Guatemala, who claimed that America's first colonists came from either Mount Hebron or Mount Olympus. The volume reproduced Almendares's illustrations from the original report in 17 engraved plates. It contains images of Mayan art, inscriptions carved into their monumental buildings, and a narrative and engravings. Notably, 9 engravings bear the initials JFW and were created by Jean-Frédéric Vold. Jean-Frédéric Vold finally resolved the Dupay report's fate in 1830. Means, and brought it to Europe. Frenchman François Latour-Allard found the manuscript in a Frenchman's Parisian library and stole it from the National Museum of Mexico. The manuscript was in the collection of Englishman Edward King, Lord Kingsborough. Lord Kingsborough collected all the reports from that time in his 9-volume work, Antiquities of Mexico. The series includes works related to ancient Mexico which appeared between 1830 and 1848. This series published several works related to pre-Columbian art and architecture. Work from the gallery included the Maya Dresden Codex, the Aztec Mendoza and Telleriano Ramensis codices, the Aztec Florentine Codex, prepared under the 16th century Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún, extensive excerpts from Humboldt's picturesque atlas, and scholarly works by Kingsborough and other intellectuals. The literary chapters in Kingsborough's volumes supported his belief that Israel's lost tribes had founded ancient Mexican civilization. Berthoud's 1922 volume contains engravings by John Frederick Waldeck, who visited Mexico in 1825. Waldeck, who claimed to be a count, worked as a hydraulic engineer in Mexico City for 9 years before traveling to the Yucatán to sketch and paint the ruins of Maya cities. From May 1832 to July 1833, he lived in the ruined structures of Palenque. A building he used as his habitation is still known as the Temple of the Count. In 1834, he visited Uxmal, producing architectural reconstructions of the ancient city. When he returned to Paris, he began producing lithographs of Maya sites based on his renderings. In 1838, he published A Voyage Pittoresque and Archaeological in Yucatán. In this book, Waldeck adds a Eurocentric spin to his interpretations of Maya art with his illustrations. Uxmal's paintings bear a definite Egyptian influence. His Maya monument illustrations depict elephants in hieroglyphics, showcasing the most distorted prejudices. He provided the first eyewitness accounts of classic Maya ruins since Mexico gained independence from Spain. Maya codices. The mystery. The Spanish conquistadors destroyed thousands of Maya books containing the most detailed collection of Maya knowledge. Only 4 of these wonders have survived to this day. These few examples from a once voluminous library provided the key to deciphering the Maya script and revealing the mysteries of the Maya. During the mid-19th century, one Maya book survived in European libraries, the Dresden Codex. The origin of this unique artifact is clouded in the mists of time, though it may have been a part of the treasure brought back to Spain by the conquistadors. In 1519, Hernán Cortés and his band of bloodthirsty bandits were sacking the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, near what is now Veracruz. They looted the Maya cities along the Gulf Coast. The Spanish reported finding numerous books when they ransacked the locals' houses. The Spanish collected samples for their artistic value, in addition to stolen valuables and captured prisoners. Cortés received bribes from the Aztec emperor and valuables collected from local raids. The royal fifth, or 20% of the booty, was to be paid to the Spanish royal court. In his report on the royal fifth, Francisco López de Gómara wrote that some books were folded into cloth, containing figures like the Aztecs used for writing letters. For the conquistadors, who lacked understanding of these books, they were of little value. Ships carrying captives from the raids, treasure and books, reached Spain safely. Giovanni Ruffo de Forli, a papal nuncio at the Spanish court who had inspected the books, described them in a letter. He reported that figures and signs, resembling Arabic or Egyptian letters, encircled a book-like painting. He described the writing as characters in a line resembling Egyptian records. The books are made from the inner bark of trees. The pages are coated with plaster and the covers are made of wooden boards, according to Italian Peter Marta d'Anghiera, present at the review. In addition to the Royal Fifth, Francisco de Montejo, the future governor of Yucatán, was one of the passengers on the treasure ship. The Spaniard Jerónimo de Aguilar, held captive for 8 years by a Maya chief, taught him this knowledge. Montejo knew about Maya books and their ability to write through Aguilar. In an interview with Montejo, Martir learned what the Maya books contained. According to Martir, the books described laws, sacrifices, ceremonies, rites, astronomical notations, and mathematical computations. The works of art that intrigued the European men of learning were Maya codices, without a doubt. We do not know what happened to the Maya books that reached Spain as part of the Royal Fifth. Only the Dresden Codex may have survived. The Royal Library of Saxony in Dresden purchased a unique book from a Vienna private collection in 1739. This book, lacking a catalogue, resurfaced in an unexpected location in 1796. Leipzig published a treatise about interior design that year. Josef Friedrich, Baron von Racknitz, wrote a 5-volume work entitled Darstellung und Geschichte des Geschmacks der vorzüglichsten Völker, Depiction and History of the Taste of Superior Peoples. One of the plates in the volumes showed a room decorated with icons from the Dresden Codex. The contents of this volume remain unknown to scholars, even though it was the first print publication of Maya script. In 1810, the famous German explorer Alexander von Humboldt wrote an atlas of American geology, meteorology, and natural history. This work depicts several pages from the Dresden Codex in intricate detail. It features the views of mountain ranges and monuments of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Views of mountain ranges and monuments of the Americas. For the first time, an accurate representation of a Maya hieroglyphic text was presented here as part of a Maya codex. Because of the lack of access to published works on the Maya civilization, research on the culture was almost impossible. By the middle of the 19th century, researchers could not decipher the Maya script in the Americas. Europe published Maya's works in limited quantities, costing thousands of dollars. These volumes were printed in elephant folio format, weighing 20 to 40 pounds each. They measured 30 inches by 24 inches, 77 centimeters by 60 centimeters. In addition, they cost thousands of dollars per set, and only a few erudite Europeans own them. Scholars in America knew little about these publications, since they were rare in Europe. The first serious exploration of Mayan cities began in 1843, when a single set of these volumes reached the United States. During the conquest by Bishop Diego de Landa, works containing invaluable Maya knowledge went missing in archives and libraries. One such work related to Maya life during the Win was lost in the Madrid archives for 300 years and not recovered. Bishop Diego de Landa destroyed all Maya books except for 4 codices. By the mid-19th century, no one had recognized the Dresden Codex for its information about Maya script. It was not until the 19th and 20th centuries that the other three codices were discovered. The discovery of the Paris Codex, Madrid Codex, and Grolier Codex in Paris, Madrid, and New York in 1859, 1866, and 1976 led to their return to Mexico. 4 of them were discovered. Is it possible that the Vatican Library has other codices in its vaults, including other great libraries worldwide? The world was first introduced to the Mayan civilization. Spain's colonies in the New World gained independence in the middle of the 19th century. The government abandoned a xenophobic policy, and the Maya homeland was open to ancient explorers and scholars in Mexico and Central America. Frederick Catherwood and John Lloyd Stevens boarded a ship in New York Harbor on October 3, 1839, and set sail for the Bay of Honduras. Their adventure would rewrite history and change their lives forever, but they had no idea how much. John Lloyd Stevens, 34, a New York City attorney, and Frederick Catherwood, 40, a British architect, were enthralled when their ship set sail for the tropics. 4 years earlier, the two had met in England and established a friendship based on a mutual interest in ancient art and architecture. Their studies of classical European and Egyptian archaeology were extensive. Travelers described and illustrated the ruins of the ancient world. Travel writers like Stevens were well known for their work. Travels in Egypt, Arabia, Persia, and the Holy Land, 1837, and travels in Greece, Turkey, Russia, and Poland, 1838, were 2 books he wrote about his travels in the Old World. In his books, he describes everyday incidents he encounters during his travels with a chatty narrative style. A gifted artist with extensive experience in the Middle East and the Mediterranean, Catherwood was an expert in art and archaeology. Having studied at the Royal Academy of Arts in London, he became a travelling illustrator after completing his formal training. In preparation for the illustrations of Greek, Egyptian, Italian, and Near Eastern monuments from ancient civilizations, Catherwood travelled extensively. Having learned of a possible lost city in Yucatán and Central America from a New York bookseller, Stevens persuaded Catherwood to accompany him in exploring these abandoned Maya towns and record them with his accurate illustrations. Stevens had been appointed by President Martin Van Buren to be the United States representative in the Central American Federation. Stevens took advantage of his diplomatic status when traveling throughout the classic Maya cities. Incidents of travel in Central America, Chiapas and Yucatán were published in volume 1841, followed by discoveries of Maya cities in Incidents of Travel in Yucatán in 1843. Stevens and Catherwood had long been familiar with Egyptian monuments and their carved hieroglyphics. Their experience with similar ancient iconography prepared them well to observe, describe, and illustrate Maya architecture and art. During their second journey, the team used a daguerreotype camera because camera technology was in its infancy. This type of camera would take several years to master photographic reproduction. Utilizing a camera lucida, Catherwood combined his natural talent for drawing with a camera lucida to capture the intricate details of Maya art. Using this device, you can project images of monuments directly onto graph paper. You could accurately depict the perspective and proportion of the images. His illustrations appeared as engravings throughout the 2-volume set. When compared with any other method of illustrating the monuments and structures of the classic Maya, camera lucida images produced an exponential increase in quality. It is well organized and clearly written, and Stevens describes the art and architecture of the monuments in the cities of classical antiquity and the daily incidents of the adventure. He believed that the carved inscriptions on the tombstones were hieroglyphics that described the history of the civilization that built the cities. The leap of consciousness he had experienced was directly related to his knowledge of the writing systems of ancient civilizations, which he had observed in the ancient towns of the Old World. One thing I believe is that its history is engraved on its monuments, Stevens wrote in Volume 1 of Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatán. Jean-François Champollion, the French scholar who decoded the Rosetta Stone, recently deciphered Egyptian hieroglyphics, and Stevens knew about it. No Champollion has yet overwhelmed them with the energies of an inquiring mind. What is the intended method of interpretation? Although Stevens's concept was innovative, Mayanists would criticize his interpretation of the script's inscriptions for decades. History and the hard work of epigraphers would prove him right in the future. European volumes of the Maya had previously cost thousands of dollars each. In 1841, Stevens's 2-volume sets were affordable for the general American population, selling for $5 each. Incidents of travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan sold 20,000 copies in the first 3 months after publication. Stevens's clever narrative and Catherwood's precise engravings made these works international bestsellers. In 1843, the pair published another 2-volume set of their travels in Yucatan. There are no better examples of accurate visual and narrative descriptions of Maya cities than these volumes. The second set, equally famous as the first, related to their exploration of Maya sites in the Yucatan. The second volume covered more abandoned cities than the first volume, even though it did not cover the distances reflected in their first effort in Maya exploration. Stevens' conclusions included his theories about the material substance and age of the classic Maya cities. Unlike the theories of European scholars, Stevens hypothesized that travelers from ancient Mediterranean cultures did not construct the ruins. He also recognized the writing at different sites as the same language and concluded that the inscriptions on the monuments represented a writing system. Additionally, he concluded that the writing system depicted on the monuments was the same as that shown in the Dresden Codex. These books are still prevalent today among enthusiasts of Maya archaeology, as they were in the 19th century. By writing these popular books, the history of the Americas was rewritten, and the Maya civilization was opened up to exploration and study in multiple fields. After the success of their books, Stevens and Catherwood never returned to Yucatan. However, their final collaboration left its mark on American culture and history. The sale of Stevens' books made him a wealthy man. His contributions played a significant role in the construction of the Panama Railroad in the late 1840s, with Catherwood serving as the civil engineer responsible for the roadway's design and construction. From the east coast of Panama, the Panama Railroad transported gold prospectors to California through the isthmus. This railroad has remained in operation to this day. Sadly, tragedy struck both sides during the completion of the Trans-Isthmus project. In October 1852, Stevens died in New York City after sustaining injuries in Panama. Catherwood's death in 1854 brought him to his final resting place. A French freighter struck the steamship Arctic on its return to New York from England. Drawings and daguerreotypes he had taken went down with him off the coast of Labrador. Unraveling the Maya Code, the collection of data. Travel in Mexico became dangerous after the Mexican-American War in 1848. Although the civil strife reduced the exploration rate, some adventurers could travel under the protection of small armies. Camera technology and photo printing had advanced, and the Yucatan became a hunting ground for adventurous explorers traversing the rainforest seeking new discoveries. Photographers captured their findings using the new type of camera. They described their discoveries through photographs as well as narratives. Despite the growing corpus of descriptions and images of the ruins, there were few attempts to decipher the Mayan script, including those made by Constantine Rafinesque and James McCullough. While traveling in Mexico between 1857 and 1861, French adventurer Claude-Joseph Désiré Charnay used a new invention of reproducible photography and a new method of plaster casting using lightweight molds to make three-dimensional copies of Mayan art. These two innovations helped make Maya art more accessible and recorded. Eugène Viollet-le-Duc published the results of Charnay's research in Cités et Ruins, Américaines, American Cities and Ruins, in 1862. Photography could be reproduced more accurately by developing the photogravure printing process. Stephens patented his work after using clear images and a running narrative. His visit to Mexico from 1880 to 1883 resulted in the publication of Les Anciennes Villes du Nouveau Monde, the ancient cities of the New World, in 1887. Consequently, his published works became accessible to the same broad public as John Lloyd Stevens's. The lost cities of the Maya regained their popularity. Alfred Percival Maudslay grew up in a wealthy engineering family near London, where he led a life of scholarship and adventure before becoming a leader in Maya archaeology. Maudslay attended Cambridge University and later became a diplomat. The British diplomat subdued rebellious tribes in Fiji while serving in the South Pacific. Upon returning from Tonga and Samoa, he became British consul for those two nations. Upon leaving the British diplomatic corps, he travelled to Mexico to begin the archaeological work that has become his legacy. After reading the works of John Lloyd Stevens, he became fascinated with the Maya ruins. Maudslay travelled 7 times to Mexico and Central America. When he first visited Maya cities in 1881, he was determined to provide as complete and accurate a record as possible of the architecture, art, and inscriptions within Chichen Itza, Copán, Palenque, Quirigua, and Yaxchilan. Maudslay made papier-mâché casts of the monuments using the newly developed wet plate photographic process. While working at the sites, he faced great hardships and transported the voluminous results of his work back to London with great effort. To prepare lithographic plates from the photographs and casts Maudslay had made of the Maya ruins, Maudslay hired an artist, Annie Hunter. First, depicting Maya's script in large-scale detail, his work was groundbreaking. As an appendix to the multi-volume work Biologia Centrale Americana, Central American Biology, Maudslay published work. Before that, the only jobs available for the monuments were the amateurish and prejudiced illustrations of Almendares and Waldeck. Maya epigraphers could now study and decipher hieroglyphics concisely and accurately for the first time. By 1902, Maudslay's work had been published in its entirety. After returning to England in 1907, Maudslay became the Royal Anthropological Institute president. Maudslay died in Hereford Cathedral in 1931. Late 19th century amateur archaeologist Augustus Le Plongeon was highly eccentric. He carried out studies, made molds of art and architecture, and took innovative photographs at Palenque and Chichen Itza, using camera technology and lightweight casting techniques. From 1880 to 1896, he published several works. He pioneered concise close-up photos by establishing panoramic photography and photography from elevated vantage points. He added visual and narrative explanations of the Maya to the growing corpus. While the quality of his pictures and molds was unparalleled by 19th century standards, his published works were a failure by the public and critics. The Metropolitan Museum in New York City purchased the extensive collection of casts Le Plongeon had. Molds were never used to make replicas and met the same fate as other Maya artifacts. They disappeared from the museum, and their future remains unknown. Mahler studied architecture and engineering in Vienna after growing up in Rome as the son of German diplomats. His career in architecture began in Vienna. When the French intervention in Mexico, 1862 to 1867, took place, he enlisted in Emperor Maximilian's army as a soldier eager to see the world. When Mexico won the war, he went from a private to a captain, but his life worsened. The Germans captured him and his troops. Instead of facing deportation as an exile, he acquired Mexican citizenship and remained in Mexico. Hence, he was known as Robert. Visiting Palenque in 1876 ignited his love for the Maya. In Tikal, a small town in Yucatán, he learned Maya and opened a photo studio. Robert Mahler contributed greatly to Mayarist scholarship, using large format cameras and wet plate processes. Mahler documented a wide range of Maya sites in detail. His method of discovering undiscovered places was unique and clever. Using chicleros, he located lost Maya sites buried deep within the rainforest. These chicleros extracted chicle from the chico zapote tree, scattered throughout the rainforest, a key ingredient in chewing gum. When the chicleros found an undiscovered site, Mahler offered them a reward. Stevens, Catherwood, and Maudslay had never discovered the world of lost cities until this discovery. After exploring various sites, he recorded the carvings on many monuments in enormous detail. It added greatly to the graphic corpus of Maya monuments and formed the basis for the initial partial deciphering of Maya hieroglyphics and the published codices. From 1912 until the 1970s and 1990s, Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology published Mahler's voluminous work. In his later years, Roberto lived a quiet life in Mérida. With no money to live on, he sold photos to tourists and taught young archaeologists. He died in Mérida in 1917 at 75. Using this method, the dates on Maya monuments could be deciphered accurately and correlated with a specific period in the site's history. Maya scholars scorned Goodman's remarkable discovery, which was forgotten until 1926 when Juan Martínez Hernández discovered and proved it correct. The hieroglyphics of the Maya are deciphered. Archaeologist Eric Thompson's professional jealousy and fear of reprobation hindered the decipherment of Maya hieroglyphics for nearly half a century. Thompson dominated Maya studies during the mid-20th century through his overbearing personality, intellectual influence, and strong will. As a field archaeologist, he wasted his talents with the Carnegie Institution, where he applied his knowledge of Maya calendrics in 1915. Leaving Carnegie in 1926, he joined the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. Thompson attacked Maya scholars who disagreed with his view of the Maya script as solely calendric. Despite this, Thompson was an efficient iconographer and gained a deep understanding of Maya mythology and religion. His monumental work, Maya hieroglyphic writing, undermined Maya decipherment, which slowed Maya script development for a generation of Maya scholars. His imperial arrogance and vicious criticism intimidated young Mayanists, following Thompson's ideas. Thompson was wrong about the Maya hieroglyphic writing's intent and characteristics. Thompson's efforts to decipher Maya glyphs resulted in some momentous discoveries. However, because of Thompson's willful determination to mislead Maya scholars, today's younger Maya scholars tend to disregard Thompson's contributions to the field. The Russian Empire's Tatiana Proskouriakoff was born in Tomsk in 1909. The Tsar asked her father, a chemist, to supervise the production of munitions for World War I. His duties required him to travel to the United States, and his family visited Philadelphia during the Russian Revolution in 1915. Philadelphia became home to the stateless family. Penn State University awarded Proskouriakoff an architecture degree in 1930. Fate turned the young architect into an archaeologist at the University of Pennsylvania Museum. The skills of Proskouriakoff in detailing archaeological artifacts attracted Linton Satterthwaite, the director of the museum's investigation of the classic Maya city of Piedras Negras, Guatemala, situated along the Usumacinta River. Between 1934 and 1938, she worked at Piedras Negras. She was responsible for producing architectural restoration drawings of structure P7 and perspective reconstruction drawings of the Acropolis, as it may have appeared during the height of Piedras Negras' power. Carnegie Institution praised Proskouriakoff's excellent renderings. As a Carnegie employee, she prepared architectural reconstructions of famous Mayan sites. Her work on Piedras Negras monuments during Eric Thompson's dictatorship in 1950 led Proskouriakoff to discover a pattern of dates using comparative observations and logical structural interpretation. She found that the inscriptions on the Piedras Negras stele described the city's achievements and the history of its rulers. Though he later agreed with Thompson, the glyphs were unrelated to astronomy, religion, or the like, which Thompson insisted should be the subject of Maya script. Mortal men and women ruled the city in the carved figures on the steles and lintels. These were not mythical figures, nor were they gods or priests, but real people who had lived at Piedras Negras. It described the history of the rulers of the city-state in the inscriptions. They had actual names, personalities, achievements, and lifestyles. In his book, Breaking the Maya Code, Michael Coe wrote that because this extraordinary woman cut the Gordian knot of Maya epigraphy, the Maya became real human beings. In retrospect, it is strange that Maya texts have not been thoroughly explored before, revealing the rulers and lords of the towns. A paper published in American Antiquity by Proskouriakoff shows the actual content of the Maya inscriptions. She was a giant in deciphering Maya hieroglyphics, and a perceptive artist reconstructing Maya structures. Her ashes lie among the ruins of Piedras Negras on the banks of the Usumacinta River. Brilliant decipherment took place at a university deep in the heart of Russia during the height of the Cold War. The academic world was blindsided by news that the Maya code had been cracked behind the Iron Curtain. The tropical rainforests of Yucatán are 10,000 miles away from the university. A revolutionary breakthrough in Maya decipherment and the most outstanding linguistic achievement in the last 2,000 years did not come about in the hallowed hall. In May 1945, the Soviet Union sacked Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich. The night before, Yuri Valentinovich Knorosov, a young Russian artillery spotter, stood before the pillaged Prussian National Library. Knorosov encountered his comrades throwing thousands of rare books into the burning pyre that fiery night in front of the library. At the edge of the conflagration, fate guided his hand to a book. He disappeared into the darkness as he snatched the book from the inferno. Knorosov's book was a rare 1933 publication containing facsimiles of the Paris, Dresden, and Madrid codices, authored by Antonio and Carlos Villacorta. The war interrupted Yuri's studies in ancient languages at Moscow State University. The book was a rare find for him. He secured his find in his knapsack and returned to Russia with his trophy. This accidental discovery of a valuable book forever altered Maya's scholarship. Knorosov, then 23, returned to Moscow State University in the autumn of 1945 to continue his studies of ancient writing systems. Egyptology was his main interest, but he was also interested in Chinese and Old Indian writing systems and Arabic and Japanese literature. His advisors recommended Egyptology. Nevertheless, after recovering the book from Berlin, Knorosov pursued his interest in archaeology, ethnology, and deciphering the Mayan script. Knorosov's professor, Sergei Alexandrovich Tokarev, challenged Knorosov to crack the Maya writing system, asking, "If you believe any writing system produced by humans can be deciphered by humans, why not try?" Knorosov met the challenge. He taught himself Spanish to translate Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán by de Landa for his research into the decipherment of Maya glyphs. To decipher Maya's script, he used translations and copies of codices, which formed the basis of his doctoral dissertation. After finishing his studies at Moscow University, he assumed a research post with the Institute of Ethnology in Leningrad. Knorosov, a scholar of ancient written scripts, deciphered the Maya code. Knowing the structure and composition of early historical writings and his brilliant mind, Knorosov recognized the stages and evolutions common to all early hands. He classified the comparative scripts as hieroglyphic and assigned Maya writing to this category based on his analysis. He then identified the syllables in these scripts. The phonetic meaning of de Landa's signs was precise, as he had written them in his manuscript. A glyph can sometimes represent a phoneme, the smallest unit of meaning in a language, or a morpheme, the smallest unit of meaning. Morozov also understood that the order of writing scripts could be inverted for use in calligraphy and other more sophisticated methods to reduce ambiguity in the reading of hands. The scientific method established a logical methodology for decipherment. Morozov's brilliant work was one of the most important contributions to deciphering the Maya script. In 1952, in his paper Ancient Writing of Central America, he suggested that Bishop de Landa's manuscript consisted of syllabic symbols rather than alphabetic letters. Through his 1963 monograph, The Writing of the Maya Indians and Translation of Maya Manuscripts, he further improved his decipherment techniques. Knorosov published Maya hieroglyphic manuscripts in 1975. His methodologies led to complete decipherment. De Landa's work had become his Rosetta Stone. Starting in 1953, Eric Thompson vigorously attacked Knorosov, claiming, among other things, that Russian claims to decipherment should be compared to other Soviet achievements of the era, such as the invention of baseball, the airplane, and many other firsts. Thompson declared that Knorosov's decipherment was yet another ruse developed by the Iron Curtain masters of propaganda. Decipherment. The beginning. In addition to the graphic and narrative works produced by Stevens, Catherwood, Maudslay, Mailer, and other historical collections, the second half of the 19th century saw the discovery and publication of lost works produced by Maya scribes and lost works from Bishop Diego de Landa. In this period, a treasure trove of original material crucial to the decoding effort was discovered and published. In 1861, the Popol Vuh, generally regarded as the most critical work in Native American literature, was discovered in Guatemala City by Abbé Charles Brasseur de Bourbourg in a private collection. Brasseur's fantastic ability as a Mayan bird dog enabled him to dig up lost Mayan artifacts. He found de Landa's manuscript at the Royal Academy of Madrid in 1862. Brasseur found the document in a dusty corner of the archives after it lay uncatalogued for 300 years. He continued to be a remarkable detective in 1866. Brasseur was shown a Maya book by a descendant of Hernán Cortés during a visit to Madrid. He considered it a family heirloom. It was a Maya codex that Brasseur recognized. In 1875, researchers discovered another fragment of a codex. According to Léon de Rosny, the French Orientalist who discovered the Paris Codex, the two Madrid finds were part of the same codex. The Madrid Codex is a giant Maya book. 1976, the Grolier Codex, the fourth known Maya document, was discovered. What is the delay in deciphering the Maya script with all the new and rediscovered information? Why didn't Champollion, renowned for the Rosetta Stone, utilize an Enigma machine to decipher the code? Coe correctly hypothesized that deciphering the Rosetta Stone was difficult due to early Mayanists' lack of linguistic training, and clarity of vision enabled Jean-François Champollion to make the crucial leap of consciousness. In addition to Rafinesque and McCullough, newspaperman Joseph T. Goodman made the first successful attempts at decipherment. As someone from a non-archaeological background, Goodman was a classic crossover Mayanist. Goodman owned and edited the Territorial Enterprise newspaper in Virginia City, Nevada Territory, the famous Comstock Lode gold strike site. His Comstock Lode investments made him rich. Tired of the desert dust, he moved west to San Francisco, where he became managing editor of the San Francisco Post and sat on the Pacific Stock Exchange. His Maya studies began in the 1880s when he retired to his ranch and grew raisin trees. Goodman used Maudslay's and Dr. Gustavus Eisen's recordings to analyze and decipher the Maya long count calendar. Goodman interpreted the Maya calendar in 1897's Biologica Centrali Americana. His discovery immediately sparked a controversy. but history has proven him correct. Scholars still use the calendar tables he published in Biologia Centrali Americana to calculate long count dates. In addition, Goodman discovered the head variants, mathematical hieroglyphs that replaced bar and dot dates in long count dates. His most significant achievement was the correlation between the Maya long count calendar and our present-day Julian calendar, announced in 1905. Archaeologist Michael Coe found an unauthorized translation of Knorosov's seminal work from 1952 in a bookshop in Merida, Mexico in 1955. It was the first review of the groundbreaking work by a Western scholar. De Lander's work was the subject of Knorosov's doctoral thesis in Russian in 1955. Coe's wife, Sophie, was bilingual in English and Russian, and translated a paper by Knorosov in 1958, ensuring that Mayanists would benefit from the work. 1958, American Antiquity published a translation describing Knorosov's methods and decipherments. In Breaking the Maya Code, Michael Coe explains that while Thompson was completely inaccurate, Knorosov was accurate. Within 4 years of Knorosov's 1963 work, The Writing of the Maya Indians, a significant shift had taken place in the acceptance of Maya hieroglyphic writing, and as many as 135 people attended a conference on Maya hieroglyphic writing in Albany, New York. Scholars from various disciplines, including archaeologists, epigraphers, linguists, and crossover experts, have previously contributed to Maya hieroglyphic decipherment. The group contributed to studying the script and interpreting ancient Maya's history, science, and technology. In the 1960s and 1970s, exponential progress was made in deciphering the codes. This included pattern analysis, De Lander's alphabet, and Knorosov's breakthrough. A series of conferences that brought together talented epigraphers and Mayaists led to breakthroughs in reading the Maya script. Michael Coe, Ian Graham, Nikolai Gruber, Norman Hammond, Peter Matthews, Stephen Houston, Linda Shaley, David Stewart, and Carl Taub were epigraphers. The Palenque Round Table and the Texas Maya meetings, which brought together young Turks and veterans, contributed to significant breakthroughs in unraveling Maya secrets. Decipherment had achieved a high level of international recognition, thanks to the contributions of many Maya scholars, many of whom were very young and came from places such as Canada, Germany, France, and Guatemala. Inscribed codices, painted vases, and inscriptions from the Maya period can now be read by 85% of epigraphers. When explorers and archaeologists discovered the Maya remains and reported the magnificence of the cities and the science they were capable of, readers worldwide became fascinated with them. Over the past century, universities, museums, foundations, and governments have cleared and consolidated the sites, allowing visitors to view the ancient Mayan cities. Many tourists and enthusiasts of Maya culture have visited the sites to marvel at the skyscraping pyramids and ornate sculptures built by ancient artisans. The number of international visitors to the Maya site now exceeds tens of millions yearly. Due to its popularity, the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, Mexico, has earned the title of one of the 7 wonders of the world. The Maya cities were explored and documented methodically and meticulously. Lost Pyramids of Mesoamerica. While most visitors to Mexico visit one of the great Mayan cities, some lesser-known ruins like Mayapan and Balamku are worth visiting. Mayapan is an ancient Maya city in the northern Yucatán peninsula of Mexico. The site has a long history, with its first occupation dating back to at least 900 BC, and its last around 1450 AD. The word Mayapan means Hill of the Jaguar. One of the 3 hills that formed it, known as Pa Chan, Place of the Jaguar, inspired the name. It was here that a jaguar deity named Chak reigned. When Chak left his post as a god of rain, the rain ceased falling on earth for 4 years until he returned. During this time, people were forced to irrigate their crops by hand, or die from thirst if they failed at growing corn without rainwater overflow from nearby lakes and rivers. Teotihuacan is one of the most important archaeological sites in Mexico. It was the center of a civilization at its peak around the 1st century BC and was abandoned around 650 AD, leaving behind an impressive collection of pyramids and other structures. As you explore this site, you will discover how these ancient people lived and what they left behind for us to admire today. Tulum is a small town on the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula south of Cancun. It may not be your first choice if you look for beaches and relaxation. But if you want to see some fantastic architecture and walk in the footsteps of the Maya, you should definitely plan to visit Tulum. The Mayans built the city between 1200 and 1450 Common Era as a seaport for trading with other cultures in Mesoamerica. Its popularity rose with increased trade throughout Mexico during this period. However, it fell into disrepair after Spanish colonization began around 1519 CE, when conquistador Hernán Cortés took control over largely autonomous states until then. The buildings are made from limestone quarried from nearby cliffs and sandstone blocks that were likely carried further away by barge or canoe along rivers and lakes, since there were no roads. The city of Uxmal is a magnificent example of the Puuc style, with its buildings built of fine stuccoed brickwork. As you explore the site, you can see how closely related it is to Chichén Itzá and other major Maya sites in the region. The Pyramid of the Magician, also known as El Castillo, is a fantastic pyramid building with 4 sides, each having 91 steps, and each step 7 feet tall for a total height of 65 feet. The House of Turtles, also known as Casa del Adivino, boasts beautiful inside and out decorations depicting turtles in various positions. Some believe these turtles to represent wisdom or knowledge. Tikal is the largest Mayan ruin in Guatemala and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Maya Kingdom, the capital of the same name and one of their most powerful cities, dates back to at least 200 BC. Its temples still stand over the jungle floor after the Maya abandoned it around 900 AD. Some are even taller. Palenque, Crown of the North, is one of the most critical sites in the Maya world. Palenque was once a thriving city and capital of one of Mexico's most powerful states. It boasts some of the most impressive ruins on this list. A German explorer discovered it in 1719 while searching for a site to build his city. The main pyramid at Palenque rises over 70 meters, 230 feet, into the air, and its steps are steep enough to pause even hardened explorers when climbing them. There are also 2 smaller temples nearby and many statues depicting jaguars. These symbolize power for humans and gods alike. Chichén Itzá is located in the Yucatan Peninsula in Yucatan, Mexico. It was built by the Maya people of the Terminal Classic period, AD 900 to 1200. Chichén Itzá means at the mouth of the well of the Itzá, or at the mouth of the well of springs. The site also contains a smaller site called El Rey, the King, which is just southeast of Chichén Itzá and was built in about AD 1000. Mayapan was the last capital of the Mayan Empire. It is located in Yucatan, southeast Mexico, very close to Mérida. Its inhabitants abandoned it between 1250 and 1450 AD due to internal warfare. Mexican archaeologists have excavated the site since 1910. But only now can they determine who built this city and why. The ruins are in the municipality of Telchaquilo near Mérida, which is part of the state of Yucatan. Xicalcolco, a settlement known for its jade eater, was the foundation for their construction. It took around 1,200 years before they were lost in the jungle until being rediscovered again by accident during logging operations. Balamku means jaguar house in Maya because there used to be drawings depicting jaguars on their walls. This tells us that this temple was dedicated mainly as an astronomical observatory rather than a religious worship place, like most other Mesoamerican pyramids. Because there aren't many carvings representing gods or goddesses inside these buildings, although there are plenty outside. Northerly invaders sacked Tula, a sister city of Chichen, and El Tajin, the northern port city that connected the two towns, in 1179. The severed trade routes weakened Chichen's power. With these losses already mounting, the ruling Itzá clan of Chichen Itza apparently began to exert more significant economic pressure on their subjects, possibly to gather food reserves in times of crisis, perhaps to defend their borders, or perhaps to maintain their luxurious lifestyles. There was, however, a more significant presence of ostensibly foreign mercenaries on city streets, who were increasingly despised. The mercenaries may have been Toltec refugees, or literal mercenaries, hired by their fellow co-religionists and warrior societies. Hunak Chil led a revolution, regardless of how it unfolded. Hunak Chil, a military general and likely member of an elite family from the interior town of Telchaquillo, attempted to overthrow the Itzá dynasty from within. His first attempt, likely in the early 1200s, shattered his army, leading to his capture. City leaders, including the ruling Itzá Armex Kauk, determined he should be killed, so he was sacrificed as an offering to Chak and thrown into the sacred cenote well, which belonged to the rain god. Hunak Chil, however, appeared the next day with prophecies he claimed were from Chak, and when his predictions came true, Armex Kauk, fearing his power, sent him back into the interior. During his second attack on Chichen Itza, Hunak Chil traveled through the old Puk heartland and gathered strength. He defeated the Itzais this time, and the survivors were driven into modern-day Guatemala. I established Mayapan as the capital of his revolutionary government, the League, after taking out Chichen Itza. As the story's fantastic nature suggests, there is plenty of debate over the actual nature of this revolution. There is a tendency to see it as a form of nationalism by the Mayans, who finally had the opportunity to oust hated foreign rulers and establish an actual Mayan government. Many alternative theories have been proposed based on folk tales depicting inter-elite strife. Perhaps a Mayan prince, Hunak Chil, was spurned by the hand of the daughter of the ruler of Chichen, Armex Kauk. So he led an army that destroyed her city and captured his beloved. In any case, the residents of Mayapan were able to form an intercity multepal, joint rule, with elite families from all rebellious cities forming a joint council. As a result, Mayapan wasn't a center of international trade like Chichen, but a planned political capital, like Washington, D.C. today, with mansions for each family when they appeared in court. In addition to the ruins of Mayapan and Chichen Itza, the descendants of Hunak Chil were known as the Kokom dynasty. Despite holding a permanent ceremonial position at the head of the League, the Kokoms were not the only prominent family within the League. It is possible there were at least many influential families in the League at the time of Spanish colonization. The League had broken down and 16 small kingdoms emerged from its ruins. Uxmal's rulers, the Shu, the Tutul Shu, were the most important. In ancient times, the Shu family maintained a genealogical chart that included Hun Huitzil Chak, the mythical founder of Uxmal. Although intriguing sociologically, asserting this blood connection does not prove its validity. It's more likely that later generations invented this connection to justify their control. Zhu was firmly in power in Uxmal during Hunak Chil's rise, and they apparently delivered the city to the League. Their participation materially and symbolically earned them the status of the League's second family. A new order established by Hunak Chil and his Shu allies appears to have displaced Chichen Itza and the Toltec-infused cultural order they constructed. archaeologists have observed that self-consciously traditional Mayan pottery styles have replaced Toltec-style pottery. It is possible that this change had a religious dimension as well. The worship of Kukulkan did not cease. In fact, the high priest was only taken from Chichen and moved to a new pyramid at Mayapan, a smaller version of the Castillo pyramid, where he continued to preside. The revolt, however, also had a religious dimension, since Hunakchil received his prophetic vision from Chak and traveled to Chak city, Uxmal, to support and worship Chak. Chak's worship among Yucatecan peasants continues today, unlike that of Kukulkan. The League eventually crumbled, and Diego de Landa described the situation roughly 3 centuries later. The governing Cocom began to covet riches and to that end negotiated with the garrison kept by the kings of Mexico in Tabasco and Xicalango that he would turn the city over to them. This led to the introduction of Mexicans to Mayapan, the oppression of many poor people and the creation of numerous enslaved individuals. The fall of Chichen may seem similar, but some differences exist. Firstly, Mayapan never dominated the Yucatán economically or religiously as Chichen did. The Cocom may have aspired to power as the Itzais did, but they feared for their strength. In addition to possibly using mercenaries, the Cocom may have built thick walls around Mayapan. The Cocom felt particularly vulnerable in their capital because they had never walled a Mayan city. Landa, a close ally of the Tutul-Shu, noted that the lord of the Tutul-Shu never consented to the mercenaries. The chiefs joined the party of Tutul-Shu, a patriotic man like his ancestors, and they plotted to kill Cocom. They did this, killing all his sons except one who was absent. This event probably occurred around 1450. Perhaps the Shu hoped to rise in the League after the Cocom fell, but they were disappointed. With the League forever shattered, revolution leaders soon retreated to their own seats of power and began waging war against one another. Additionally, this period saw the abandonment of Uxmal and Chichen Itza. All were in terminal decline. The civil wars may have disrupted long-distance trade and local food supplies. It is possible that armies looted settlements, and commoners fled into the fortified strongholds of their lords. Due to Mayapan's fortification, internal warring might have begun before the official collapse of the League. In any case, the Shu family left Uxmal and settled in Man, a town east of Uxmal in the foothills of the Puuc region. Uxmal's ancient heartland was still ruled by the Shus, which included Kaba, Sail, Labna, and other Puuc towns. Uxmal remained a place of pilgrimage for the Shu and was recognized as their ancient seat of power. But the Mayan world had permanently shifted, and the city was never occupied again. Abandonment of Uxmal and its rediscovery. After Hernán Cortés landed on the Yucatán Peninsula in 1521, Uxmal remained revered among the Maya. According to the available Mayan texts, Uxmal achieved considerable success by his own standards. In 1528 and 1535, the Spanish founded settlements on the coast and invaded the Yucatán. Although Cortés did not tarry, he had an Aztec empire to conquer. The successful alliance was forged in 1542, thanks to Canishu in Mani, who leveraged the Spanish presence. In 1610, that finally happened when the Shu gained control of local politics and revived Mayan unity. But in 1546, the last independent Yucatecan dynasty fell. Instead, the Maya were placed under the increasingly fanatical jurisdiction of Bishop Diego de Landa, who, furious at his own converts' treasonous heresy, collected and burned all the Maya books he could find, boiling them in a central plant in Man. Although the Spanish converted the Shu to Catholicism and abandoned their rituals at Uxmal, Not all of their subjects were so willing, since they occasionally reported finding incense and offerings in the ruined temples after the Spanish took over. Occasionally, Spanish tourists visited Uxmal during that period, ensuring that non-Maya people never entirely forgot the city, but not to the extent that it aroused international interest. Because of two English-speaking scholars, Catherwood and Stevens, the outside world sat up and took notice. The book Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas and Yucatán, 1843, caused an international sensation and fit into a growing interest in lost cities in the West. However, for much of the 19th century, the Mayan revolt and the brutal caste war hindered research in the region. A Harvard archaeological team created casts of several of Uxmal's most prominent buildings, including the House of the Governor's facade in 1893. The models were dismantled and shipped to Chicago for the Chicago Columbian Exhibition, the World's Fair, or the White City. Several American architects, including Frank Lloyd Wright, visited these facades, including thousands of spectators. Several of Wright's buildings incorporate Puuc-style elements, including chalk masks. Elaine Barnsdall House and Charles Ennis House represent the height of this style, called Maya Revival. Since then, Uxmal has been a touristic and archaeological destination, partly because of its remarkable architecture and its accessibility to visitors to Merida. After the Mexican Revolution, which ended in 1920, the Mexican government took an enormous interest in its ancient heritage and declared the ruins a state patrimony. The status of Uxmal was further strengthened in 1996 when UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site, arguably the highest award an ancient site can receive. Thus, more than a millennium after it flourished, Uxmal is still treasured in the hearts of Mayans and Mexicans, and is visited and studied by multitudes worldwide. A careful study has led to the reconstruction of essential structures and the gradual restoration of the site. There is still much to learn about the beautiful and enigmatic ruins with this ongoing research, which will provide new insights in the coming years. A handful of elderly speakers of the Itzá branch of the Mayan language still speak it today in the highlands of Guatemala, near Lake Petén Itzá. Despite its distance from the lowlands, where it was once the language of the mighty city-state of Chichén Itzá, the language retains more similarities to lowland languages than its neighboring Mayan dialects, suggesting migrations following the fall of Chichén Itzá. What does the disappearance of Chichén Itzá mean with certainty? This is a timeline of events during the post-classical period in Yucatán. Chichén Itzá establishes its first settlement, Est, in 455 AD. Uxmal's foundation, Estant, dates back to 750 AD. The classic Maya states collapsed between 750 and 900 AD in the southern part of the country. The Puuc style began around 850 AD Tsetonstada. Lord Chark's reign in Uxmal, 875 to 900 AD. The Puuc style reached its peak in the Yucatán between 875 and 880. In 925 AD, Uxmal's royal rule ended and the classic Mayan period ended. Uxmal's Pyramid of the Magician is completed in the mid-90s. Chichen dominated Yucatán in the late 900s, but Uxmal eclipsed it. Chichen is ruled by Toltec-influenced leaders in the early 1000s. In the 1100s, Mayapan became a small settlement. A Toltec city named Tula fell in 1179, estimated. The Shu, Amestawir, laid the foundation of Mani around 1200. The vision of Hunak Seal in 1221. In 1222, Hunak Chil conquered Chichen and founded Mayapan as its capital. In 1441, the Kokoms collapsed, Mayapan was destroyed, and Uxmal's final decline began. Cortés stopped at the Mayan coast when he traveled to Mexico in 1521. First and second Spanish invasions in 1528 and 1535. Spanish conquest of Mani and the Shu-Spanish alliance in 1542. Spanish conquered the last Yucatecan cities in 1546. The Great Auto de Fe in Mani in 1562 resulted in the destruction of the Mayan elite culture. Catherwood and Stephen visited Uxmal and other cities in the 1840s. The Maya, led by the Cocombs and Itza, attacked Mexico. The 1890s Harvard University expedition studied the site and brought casts to the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, attracting international attention. Uxmal was mapped by Sylvanus Morley in 1909. A nightly exhibition of lights and sound was inaugurated in 1975. World Heritage Sites were inscribed by UNESCO in 1996. Chichen Itza's origins. Any great ancient city's exact beginnings are likely to be lost forever to later construction and mythologizing. The same is true for Chichen Itza. However, while researchers may never be able to say for sure where or when the first bull game took place, they can figure out why this city became so important during that time. Mesoamerican scholars call this time the Classical period, and it was the height of Mayan culture and power. Tikal and Calakmul ruled the northern highlands, far south of the Yucatán, while Teotihuacan, Cholula, and Monte Alban ruled central Mexico to the west. Through their many client states, this was a relatively stable period. Athens and Sparta engaged in a massive Cold War. There are at least 2 cenotes in the city, one of which is named Chichen Itza, which means near the edge of the Itzayas well. Since water sources were rare on the peninsula, the cenotes were a primary reason for the city's location. Even though the rainforest appears lush and water-filled, the porous bedrock means that stable water sources are just as valuable here as they would be in a more overtly dry climate. Hence the enduring importance of Chak to the Yucatecan Maya. When the Anglo-Saxons conquered Britain and Attila ravaged Europe, they founded the city. Either 415-45 or 455 CE is cited as the date of the settlement's founding, but both dates appear to be close to the truth. Although these dates fit well within the classic period of Mayan history, the town was a little-known backwater for centuries. Climate change has been argued to be responsible for the end of the classic period across Mesoamerica. Ancient polities could not hold on to power, resulting in the fall of great empires in Mesoamerica. Mayan culture moved north onto the limestone shelf of the Yucatan Peninsula, following the collapse of this period in cities such as Mayapa, Uxmal, Tulum, Coba, and Chichen Itza. While people have permanently moved across Mesoamerica, such as the bull game, this period saw unprecedented movement. As a result of this movement, Toltec influence shaped Chichen Itza, discussed further in depth in a later chapter, as well as the growth of the cult of the feathered serpent, Kukulkan, called Quetzalcoatl by the Aztecs. The city's rise in stature paralleled the height of this cult, which eventually centered on Chichen Itza. Kukulkan is depicted on the west face of the northern stairway of El Castillo. In its earliest days, Chichen Itza was part of a larger group of Mayan cities called the Puch. To the west of Chichen Itza, Uxmal was the center of Puch architecture. Building elements and lines were often dominated by broad horizontal lines and smooth stucco finishes. An essential characteristic of the Puch style was its restrained, carefully ordered ornamentation. The Maya people have described Chichen Itza's foundation in oral history. Itza was the name of the city's ruler, but it's actually a blurry word. Besides appearing in the city's name and ruler's title, it's also used for the ethnic group that eventually dominated the town and still exists in northern Guatemala. The term also refers to a caste of warriors who fled Mayapan to found Chichen Itza after rebelling against the Cocom, the title of Mayapan's priest king. Eventually, these castes became ethnicities and lent their names to cities and rulers. The legend also states that these Itzayas claimed descent from Kukulkan. But this may have been a later addition, since the town did not seem to be dedicated to Kukulkan, but to Cha'ak, the pan-Mayan rain god. In 120 years, the Kokoms of Mayapan conquered Chichen Itza and overthrew the Itzayas, making the city their dependency. Even though the stories tell only part of the elite tale of war, rebellion, and conquest, they are not implausible. Although the post-classic transformation caused dozens of tiny statelets to emerge, Chichen Itza became the mighty state and the most famous city of the Mayas. During the classic period, Chichen Itza and Uxmal, both in the west, arose as allies or sister cities in response to Cobar's decline. Lord Cha'ak, ruler of Uxmal, concentrated on land-based expansion, while Chichen Itza capitalized on sea-based trade. And what the Itzayas brought to the trade table was salt, a vital and difficult-to-obtain nutrient. The English expression, "worth his weight in salt," arose because salt was a rare and expensive commodity in the ancient world. The Chichen Itza Empire controlled the coastal port of Isla Cerritos and Emal, one of the largest salt works in Mesoamerica. During this time, the Itzayas built a ceremonial center in the city's heart, similar to the Puuk centers around it. The southern group of the proper core includes many of these buildings. Caracol, a structure similar to Uxmal's observatory, is the most famous. A Puuk-style caracol is decorated with images of the hook-nosed rain god Cha'ak, and smaller buildings around it include the Red House, the Temple of the Lintels, and the House of the Deer. In addition, an inscription found on a nunnery group building in this complex dates to 875 to 880 CE. During the heyday of Uxmal, and before the rise of Kukulkan and the Toltec, influence in the 10th century. As a result, these structures are connected to an era when Chichen Itza would have been a young, up-and-coming power, allied with but probably still under the shadow of Uxmal. Therefore, scholars can combine Chichen Itza's probable origins with the archaeological record and oral history. A group of warrior rebels from Mayapan, or another lost city, fled their town and formed or conquered a settlement near the coast they named after. After allying with an older dynasty in the neighboring town of Uxmal and their famous king, Lord Cha'ak, they emulated the Uxmal elite's Puuk architectural style during the early post-classic period. Their specialization in seaborne trade and salt mining has enabled them to carve out an increasingly lucrative niche. And though they may have been temporarily conquered by their former overlords, they have not lost sight of their growing commercial success and connections to other exotic societies around the Gulf of Mexico. Foreign influence, primarily from the Toltecs of central Mexico, would forever reshape the city. The decline of Uxmal began with the beginning of the post-classic period. By 925 CE, Uxmal had abandoned its central buildings and most other Puuk centers. The powerful Shu family, who revered Uxmal's shrines until the Spanish conquest, forever eclipsed its importance, but they never forgot it. Although Mayapan remained under the Kokomes until the Spanish conquest, it did not ascend again during the post-classic era. Only Chichen Itza remained in power in the late 900s. As Chichen Itza grew by controlling the salt trade in the local region, it expanded into a trade network dominated at the time by Tula, the capital of the Toltec people. Toltecs are one of the most famous Mesoamerican groups, but are also the most mysterious and controversial. Toltec comes from the Aztec word Toltecatl, translated as an artisan. As a result of the Toltecs' establishment of a strong state centered in Tula, the Aztecs claimed the Toltecs as their cultural predecessors. Additionally, the Aztecs kept track of the Toltecs' history, including a list of essential rulers and events. This suggests the Toltec peak took place between 900 and 1100 CE. Contrary to the Mayans, the Aztecs are not widely viewed or remembered with nuance, partly because their leader destroyed extant Aztec writings and rewrote a mythologized history explaining their dominance before the Spanish arrived. We have reconstructed Toltec history and culture from Aztec accounts, but the evidence is incomplete and fragmentary. Considering the Aztec leaders' revisionist history, verifying Aztec accounts of the Toltecs becomes even more challenging, with some scholars calling the Toltec culture nothing but a myth. Scholars continue to debate whether the Toltecs were an actual historical group. However, the settlement at Tula does share many similarities with Chichen Itza, adding a layer of mystery. Since the architecture and art of both sites are so similar, archaeologists and anthropologists have assumed they had the same cultural influences, even though historians are uncertain about the historical timeline and whether Tula influenced Chichen Itza or vice versa. In addition to their mastery of long-distance trade, the Toltecs controlled many sea routes that brought obsidian and turquoise down from the deserts of what is now northern Mexico and the southwestern United States. The Itzayas brought gold and cacao from southern Guatemala and Nicaragua, which led to in Chaco Canyon, northwestern New Mexico. Evidence of this network can be found at Pueblo Bonito, a 9th–12th century settlement. It was the final stop of trade routes that originated far to the south of Chichen Itza and were inhabited by the ancestors of today's Puebloans. They mined turquoise and tanned buffalo hides for trade, but the most valuable commodity was the import of macaw feathers from Central America. On their way north, some of these feathers would have passed through the markets and port of Chichen Itza. A cosmopolitan center, Chichen Itza was probably seen by its neighbors as a place to meet people from different cities across the seas, from the legendary deserts of the far north, from the fallen mountain kingdoms of the southern Maya, or from the strange jungles of the deep south. For the Mesoamericans, Chichen Itza was like no other on Earth except Tula to the north. Central Mexico imported more than precious stones. Amid the decline of other Puuc cities around Chichen Itza, the future metropolis set its own course. The city's rulers imported a series of cultural, religious, political, and architectural innovations from their trading partners in Tula around the 9th century. Worship of the god Kukulkan is perhaps the most significant import of this period. In Toltec, Kukulkan was known as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, the creator of humanity through the sacrifice of his own blood, and the giver of maize to his creations. After discovering the truth, he was said to have set himself on fire out of remorse for committing incest with his sister. As mentioned, he rose to heaven and became Venus, which was highly significant to the early Itzayas who built the caracol. When Hernán Cortés conquered the Aztecs, he used the same legend Hernán Cortés used to his advantage when crossing the sea on a boat. Ancient Mesoamericans were flexible in adding gods and other supernatural beings to their pantheons. Today, Maya shamans confidently invoke the rain god Chac and the Virgin Mary, even incorporating Christianity into their pantheons. The feathered serpent cult entered the Mayan region through the port city of Chichen Itza, and Kukulkan may have been worshipped alongside other deities without much anxiety. Despite this, it is remarkable that the Itzayas adopted Kukulkan as their deity and made their city the center of Kukulkan's worship throughout the Mayan world. El Castillo, built in the new, Toltec-influenced northern section of the urban core, appears to have served as the temple of Kukulkan. El Castillo is undoubtedly one of the most impressive monuments in ancient Mesoamerica, measuring 60 meters on each side and reaching a height of 12 meters. Mesopotamian ziggurats, or early Egyptian pyramids, were built in a step style, unlike later Egyptian pyramids such as those at Giza, which had smooth surfaces. Modern climbers quickly discover that the tower's broad staircase is steep and narrow, forcing them to turn their feet sideways and sometimes lean forward, scrambling with their feet and hands. To submit to Kukulkan's might, the devotee may have to clamber up in a semi-prostrate position. As well as being much more expansive than typical Mayan pyramids, El Castillo also has a squat profile reminiscent of pyramids found across central Mexico, in places like Cholula, Tula, Teotihuacan, and Tenochtitlan, sheathing a pre-existing pyramid in a new layer of stone. Burying it and building a taller, broader replacement was a standard Maya method of building pyramids. The Mexican government discovered two smaller pyramids within the current exterior during excavations in the 20th century. There was an excellent blend of Mayan and Toltec influence on these older pyramids, which was more dominated by Toltec influences than on the last version. In addition to El Castillo, there were many other Toltec-influenced buildings. Near the Castillo, the Tzompantli is a low platform decorated with jaguar and eagle images. The structure has no antecedents in Mayan architecture, but it is strikingly similar to the Tzompantli in central Mexico, which displayed decapitated heads on wood scaffolds. Besides the Temple of the Warriors, Chichen Itza has a temple with elaborate colonnades and carvings of dramatic Toltec warriors. The most striking difference, however, isn't easily visible from an architectural perspective. There was no king in Chichen Itza, even though kingship was an essential component of classic Mayan polity. In Mayan politics, the relationship between the king and the gods, and between the king and his subjects, was central. The king made sacrifices to please the gods and continued to reap their blessings. Like regular rainfall, the gods withdrew their boons when the king failed to perform his duties. The kings were also believed to be the high priests of the city's patron gods. The personages of the king, his family, and their ancestors occupy a significant portion of Mayan art, history, and architecture. On the other hand, the Toltec leaders of Tula did not inherit their power through their family genealogy. In other words, they were elected by other elites, family heads, and confirmed by the gods' high priests, one of whom was Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan. Chichen Itza appears to have been similarly organized, as there are no references to the dynastic origin of leaders, and many inscriptions include no mention of a king whatsoever, something that was unheard of at earlier Mayan sites. Scholars have speculated that Chichen Itza may have been a confederacy of powerful families dedicated to Kukulkan's worship, because there is no reference to leaders as brothers or companions. The Itza warrior brotherhood, evidently influenced by the Toltecs, might have been formed by local elites from other towns such as the Uxmal Shus and Mayapan Kerms. Regardless of its origin, it illustrates yet another difference between Chichen Itza and traditional Mayan. In the modern period, it is believed that Chichen Itza reached its peak when its leaders allied with the Sioux family, the former leaders of Uxmal, to overthrow the Kokoms of Mayapan. Mayapan had obliterated Uxmal in a previous war, but now its rulers sought revenge. The general outline of events may be correct, even though the date given for these events is 1436 CE, long after the archaeological record shows Chichen Itza had risen and fallen. Uxmal, Sioux, and Chichen Itza may have been allies for the dominance of northern Yucatán, but the fighting can be considered the breakdown of a previous alliance. Before becoming a Mayan superpower, Chichen Itza was likely just an outpost of Toltec culture or a center for transcontinental trade. During its heyday, Chichen Itza gradually rose to prominence and began to influence other Mayan city-states and the way of life of elites and commoners alike. One of the most precise indicators of Chichen Itza's influence is the expansion of the Kukulkan cult through the Mayan region. In Mayapan, temples were erected in honor of Kukulkan, and the Spanish documented a grand yearly festival dedicated to Kukulkan in the center of Mani, run by the Sioux family. The surrounding cities enthusiastically embraced Kukulkan worship, erecting temples in Mayapan. The wind god was also worshipped in other post-classic Yucatán cities, including Tulum on the eastern shore. Popol Vuh, a sacred book by the Quiche Maya, depicts the sovereign plumed serpent as the world's creator within their mythology. As the book opens, it states, "Whatever might be is not there. Only the pooled water, only the calm sea, only, it alone, is pooled. In the darkness of the night, there are only murmurs and ripples. The maker, the modeler, the sovereign plumed serpent, the bearers and the begetters are alone in the water, surrounded by a shimmering light. There they are, enclosed in blue-green quetzal feathers. They are known as plumed serpents for this reason. They are outstanding thinkers and great knowers. The Lacandon Maya, the last non-Christianized Mayan group, provide perhaps the most persuasive evidence of the god's eventual importance. In the Lacandon jungle on the other side of the highlands from Chichen Itza, the Lacandon Maya still practice their ancient religion. Kukulkan appears as the flying serpent companion of the sun god, as these tiny farms lie far from the great pyramid of Kukulkan, El Castillo. Elites probably saw it as the center of the universe. Archaeologists discovered a thriving market within the pyramid that traded goods such as salt, cotton, precious stones, copper, gold, tools, cacao, feathers, and furs. As a result of this abundance of wealth, the elite adorned themselves and their homes with the most delicate items. Mayans were renowned for their grand parties, which included competitive drinking, feasting, dancing, music, jesting, storytelling, and theatre. Extensive frescoes adorned many of their large homes. Mercantile pursuits were meaningful, but ritual duties were even more so. Several temples were located around the core, in addition to the pyramid, and the elite performed bloodletting from a very young age. There was no doubt a pilgrimage center in Chichen Itza, which was why the city's leaders gave their blood to the gods. Chichen Itza's leaders set the standard for Kukulkan worship for the rest of the Mayan world. Accordingly, Chichen elites were under more pressure to perform rituals than in other cities, both from their own people and foreign observers. The importance of rituals in the city is perhaps not surprising, given its prestige and the reputation of traditions. It appears that El Castillo was designed with a broad courtyard at its base for crowds of spectators to watch, and a diverse marketplace would have benefited every kind of resident. Moreover, many people were likely proud of their citizenship in the world's mightiest city, and the sovereign plumed serpent could not be worshipped anywhere else. Although commoners comprised most of the population in a wealthy city-state like Chichen Itza, their lives were not nearly as glamorous as those of their leaders. Spanish observers' accounts give much insight into this group's archaeology, even if it isn't as well developed as the elites. Diego de Landa wrote a detailed description of the Yucatán. The infamous Spanish bishop burned Maya texts. He described wooden houses with whitewashed walls and steeply pitched, thatched roofs as peasants' homes. Local elites controlled the fields near their homes, cultivating corn, chili peppers, and vegetables in addition to their own areas. Hunters hunted venison, wild game, manatees, and fish in forests and swamps. De Landa confirms the traditional male attire by comparing frescoes and books. They wrapped several times around the waist, leaving one end hanging in front and another behind, for breeches and leggings. Their wives embroidered these ends with featherwork and much care. Large square mantles covered their shoulders. There were no other garments for the women, only sandals made from hemp or deerskin. The women wore skirts and, in some regions, double-sided mantles below the armpits. But others wore a long, wide sack, open at the sides and reaching the thighs. Many Mayan women are known for their embroidery even today. The Mayan women had elaborate hairstyles, including coiffures as fine as those of the most coquettish Spanish women, piercings, tattoos, body paint, and teeth filing. The elites wore more delicate clothing and decorations than people with low incomes. It is clear from these descriptions that at the height of Chichen Itza's power, – 'Society' 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 – 'society As a result of Chichen Itza's wealth, those in control could display incredible power and sophistication. It is important to note that the city's leadership established a standard of ritual and elegance that set the standard for the entire Mayan region. This promoted not only their trading influence, but also the cult of Kukulkan. Those at the bottom of the pyramid lived much like peasants elsewhere, working long hours on personal and elite-owned plots of land and living in small spaces with wealthy families. On the autumnal and vernal equinoxes, crowds gather at the base of Chichen Itza's Castillo, a stepped pyramid that dominates the city center. The ancient site, which may have been constructed around the same time as Europe's first massive Gothic cathedrals, is dedicated to the serpent god Kukulkan, which explains its twice-yearly appearance. Throughout the day, the shadows cast by the pyramid's corners seem to slither down the balustrade of the principal staircase. In addition to El Castillo, Chichen Itza was more than a ceremonial center. The city was arguably the most powerful city ever built among the Mayans, dwarfing its regional superpowers, Tikal and Calakmul, and being one of the most spectacular and essential cities during the post-classic period. The city's size and apparent power have attracted archaeological attention for decades, and excavations are continuing. But Chichen Itza is also unique among other sites in Mesoamerica for fusing Mayan art and architecture with styles from Toltecs. There have been early theories that Chichen Itza was the eastern capital of an empire originating in Tula, the equivalent of considering Chichen to be Tula's Rome. But archaeological evidence has not supported these theories. According to scholars today, the influence of the Toltecs was widespread. Trade and religious ties formed the basis of the relationship. In a cosmopolitan city where goods, ideas, and people from all over Mesoamerica met, Toltec influence fused with earlier Puuc Mayan forms to create unique art. Tzompantli, skull platform, at Chichen Itza, displays skulls impaled vertically on the walls, a style influenced by the Toltecs. There are two Mayan worlds: the lowlands of the Yucatán Peninsula, Mexico's equivalent of Florida, jutting into the Gulf of Mexico, the highlands of Guatemala, and the Mexican state of Chiapas. A few miles north of the Gulf shore, Chichen Itza is located in the lowlands. Unlike Florida, a glorified sandbar, the Yucatán sits on firm bedrock. Because of this geology, there are almost no topographically distinguishable marks on the landscape. The only breaks are the ancient cities' pyramids and the modern ones' church spires. A thick tropical rainforest covering the peninsula is home to tapirs, jaguars, toucans, and scarlet macaws. It is essential to understand the methods of the ancient Mayans of Chichen Itza by studying the contemporary Mayan community of Cobar, living south and west of the ruins. Agriculturally and socially, this landscape defines much of what was and is possible. Rainforests concentrate nutrients in the bodies of trees, leaving the soils relatively thin and porous, which meant the Mayans could use the average rainforest agricultural technique of swiddening. A small central town much more minor than Chichen Itza is home to Cobar's residents, with a few outlying settlements scattered among the forest. A farmer's council divides the land into milpas or fields, then clears it with Cobar individuals. Following the removal of the thin soil, the farmer searches for areas where subsoil limestone wears away into holes filled with soil, and plants corn and other crops in these holes depending on the crop. With crops scattered across the milpa, it appears disorganized. The archaeologist Ellen Kintz has argued that ancient Yucatecan cities like Chichen Itza functioned similarly, though on a much larger scale. They needed a wide area to support the urban core, as crops could not be planted densely, adding to the Mayan system of scattered independent city-states. Corn, maize, beans, and squashes were staple crops on Mayan farms. Cotton, cocoa, and honey were produced in some Maya communities, and whatever was not needed for basic survival was traded. Maya farming practices included ditch irrigation, mounded fields, and reclamation of swampland along the coast of modern Belize. These techniques could have achieved an extended period of agricultural productivity. Like modern Mexico, the ancient Mayans also found it easy to construct straight highways through the jungle. Since the Mesoamericans did not have domesticated pack animals, these roads enabled farmers to walk to and from their fields daily. In fact, many of their streets still exist today, elevated above the jungle floor on terrace-like structures. Chichen Itza and her sister cities connected the various city-states and also served as a link between the agricultural outlands and the core settlements. The urban core of Chichen Itza was roughly 15 square miles, or 25 square kilometers, about half the size of Staten Island in New York City. Today, rainforests cover most of the ruins, leaving only the core structure, akin to the National Mall in Washington, D.C., accessible to the public. The outer areas would have been characterized by pole and thatch buildings, poles set into the ground with branches between them as walls that provided privacy and allowed breezes to enter. Local grasses were used for thatching the roofs. Stone buildings, conversely, are more common in increasingly wealthy areas of the city, where they are relatively impervious to hurricanes. Extended families likely arranged the buildings into compounds. The compound consisted of several buildings: a kitchen, removed from the others to prevent fires, an open area with small gardens, and 3 rooms for fruits, nuts, vegetables, and fuel. As almost all archaeological attention at the site has been focused on the spectacular ceremonial core, little is known about the lives of these suburbanites and their neighborhoods. The porous underlying limestone of the Yucatán Peninsula, as in the Milpa cultivation system, absorbs most of the rainwater when it falls. So the peninsula has almost no surface water sources, either lakes or rivers. At Chichen Itza, there are no rivers or lakes nearby. Cenotes are giant, open sinkholes that provide most of the citizens' water needs. People believed cenotes were so sacred that they only used one at Chichen Itza for rituals. A ritual causeway connected the sacred cenote to the city center north of it. Nearby residents sometimes invoke it to pray for rain and a prosperous harvest by offering precious goods to the rain god Chak. Cenote Exlarca probably served as the population's primary water source. Each Mayan city had a ceremonial core, a district of grand stone buildings, and broad courtyards at its heart, which served as the city's religious, political, military, and probably economic center. As the governing elite demonstrated their wealth and power in elaborate rituals and works of art, this district served as the organizing nexus for the whole city-state. Its ceremonial core could be located within a few hundred yards of the sacred cenote and has been divided by historians into 2 sections. An older team to the south, emulating the styles of surrounding Puc Maya cities, and a younger, more extensive area to the north emulating Toltec styles. The majestic symmetrical pyramid El Castillo, only the outermost pyramid layer, dominates its north side and has undergone multiple expansions over the centuries. Other important buildings of ancient Chichen Itza include the skull platform, the Temple of Jaguars, the Temple of Warriors, the Caracol, and the nunnery. As a result, many of these names were given by Spanish conquerors, such as El Castillo, or English-speaking archaeologists based on the physical description, such as the Red House near the Caracol, or by assuming their function, such as the High Priest's Temple at the northern end of the southern group. It has also attracted interest for decades, almost as much as El Castillo. In Spanish, the name means snail, referring to a spiral staircase within the central turret that resembles a snail shell when viewed from above. Located on a broad stone platform, the Caracol rises above its neighbors, dominating the southern complex of buildings like many Mayan structures. The most prominent feature is a circular tower at the top of the caracol. Despite the tower's destruction over the centuries, the remaining walls have served as sitting guides for ancient observers tracking the Sun and Venus, two crucial celestial features for the Maya. According to the Dresden Codex, Venus was considered the harbinger of war, death, and victory during Chichen Itza's glory days. The most potent cities, Chichen Itza included, fought in Star Wars, referencing Chake-Ek, another star whose motion may have been carefully monitored at Caracol. Venus, Mars, and solar eclipse phases are plotted in the Grolier Codex, written around 1230 CE, and the Dresden Codex, written shortly before the Spanish conquest. In addition to the Grand Ball Court, the center had several other essential features. Mesoamerican ball games were a combination of sports and religious rituals that spread throughout the Mayan region and even into what became the Aztec Empire, reaching as far north as modern-day Arizona. At least one ball court in every Maya city has been excavated, indicating the central importance of Poctopok. Two teams of 2 to 7 people moved a rubber ball by hitting it with their bodies without using their hands or feet inside the long rectangular structures with sloping or vertical walls. Using the hips was the most effective way to direct the ball. The objective was to pass the ball through a vertical circular ring attached to the lengthy court wall. According to archaeological evidence, this game played an important role in several Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya. Ajay-Pitzal, ball player, was one of the standard titles for Mayan kings, because the game played such an integral role in courtly life. In addition, sculptures associated with ball courts suggest that the game ended with human sacrifice, presumably captives, though some have suggested that the losing team or the captain was sacrificed. The theory that the game settled municipal grievances or inter-city wars makes sense in light of this procedure. To improve the quality of the game, a ritual sacrifice of the losers would have been rather severe if the game was only played for entertainment and competition. Chichen Itza's Grand Ball Court had a stone ring that was nearly 30 feet high. At Chichen Itza, researchers discovered a ball court the size of a football field. It measured 140 meters, 470 feet, long and 35 meters, 115 feet wide. Hoops were located around walls that were 10 meters high, 32 feet. 6 stone panels surround these walls, depicting bas-relief images of bull players girded in armor, resembling something between a modern American football player and a full-out Mayan warrior. Archaeologists have never seen such a large playing field elsewhere, leading many to believe that the game was more like a pageant than a sport. Undoubtedly, the city's elites viewed it as vital to their power structure, or else they wouldn't have invested much energy in its development. Mesoamerican ball court sizes varied depending on the location. Unlike other Mesoamerican cities conquered by the Spanish, such as Cusco and Tenochtitlan, no books documented Chichen Itza's fall. The city wasn't conquered, so there were no fires and bloodshed. It appears to have faded over time and become abandoned, and since this process was gradual over an extended period, the causes of Chichen Itza's collapse are likely complex and changing. Furthermore, historians may never be able to determine the cause of Chichen Itza's demise, or understand how it ended. Complexity and obscurity should not be confused with mystery. Documentaries and popular writing have extensively explored mysterious ancient places such as Chichen Itza, Stonehenge, and the Moais of Easter Island, leading to the emergence of wild theories such as the claim that El Castillo served as a temple for ancient alien astronauts. While the details of Chichen Itza's founding and decline are difficult archaeological questions, in the archaeological record, nothing can be interpreted without relying on extraterrestrials or supernatural explanations. The Chichen Itza buildings are impressive by any standard, but they're even more impressive when archaeologists understand the techniques used by their ancient builders and how the designs evolved. However, no evidence exists that abnormal factors contributed to the city's decline. There are various reasons why cities decline naturally, including climate change, military conquest, shifting trade routes, exhaustion of natural resources, declining harvests, drought, or pestilence. Also, the notion that the Maya were lost or disappeared is absurd, given that many Maya are still living in the region. They are actually the majority population in Guatemala, and a significant minority in Belize, and the Mexican states of Quintana Roo, Yucatán, Campeche, Chiapas, and the nation of Belize. The Maya story of Canek directly contributed to the decline of Chichen Itza. A king of Chichen called Canek fell desperately in love with a princess. But because she refused to return his love or obey her parents, she married a more powerful Yucatec cacique. As the feast ended, the din of war replaced the gaiety, and the Chichen prince disappeared, carrying off the bride. Unable to bear the loss, the discarded lover armed his dependents and suddenly attacked his rival. Fearing his rival's vengeance, he fled the country with most of his vassals. This story does not explain how the region's mightiest city disappeared. The book claims Chichen Itza had more powerful enemies than its king. If so, the city was already declining. The possibility exists, however, that there is some truth in this, since it is known that at one point, as the city began to fade, a group of its sires fled the town and the lowlands. As refugees, these people settled in Guatemala's second-largest lake, Petén Itzá, now known as Guatemala's second-largest lake. In the region of Tayasal, the Itzayas still ruled the area when the Spanish arrived. Tayasal, the last independent Mayan city-state the Spanish conquered, does not rank among the great Mayan capitals. Due to its isolation and well-fortified location, it was built on an island. While it is unlikely that Canek's followers succeeded in building a fortress to shield themselves from their enemies' wrath, they did manage to construct a bastion that endured. Due to the destruction of both Tula and El Tajin, the city quickly lost much of its relevance after being founded and located based on long-distance trade in commodities and ideas. With business moving in new directions, wealthy families of the Confederacy, such as the Cocomes and Xiu, were forced to turn to holdings outside the city for power and wealth. The center of power had already moved to Mayapan by 1220, about 50 years after Tula fell. There may have been a period of strife between elite families desiring to maintain or increase their power in this shifting political and economic landscape, which may explain why elites like Canek retreated up into the highlands to establish a new Itza city near Lake Petén Itzá. After the Spanish arrived, the old city continued to be used for ritual purposes, but it slowly faded with fewer and fewer families living in what was becoming a jungle ruin. It is still believed that the last non-Catholicized Maya group, the Lacandon of Chiapas, performed rituals within the ancient ruins of Bonampak. The city has had a prayer and practice tradition since its founding. There are also accounts of Uxmal ruins used by the powerful Xiu family, reputed descendants of the former rulers, and rituals occurring at Chichen Itza even after the Spanish conquest. Like the Lacandon, they probably made sacrifices and prayers at crumbling temples and altars associated with gods and ancestors. In religious lore, it may have become associated with an era of mythic ancestors that deserved veneration because of the ruined state of the buildings. In fact, Bishop Landa, the Spaniard sent to Christianize the Maya, ordered a cannon, and probably guards, placed on top of El Castillo to prevent such activity. Therefore, though Chichen Itza declined, it continued to serve as a sacred landscape and became folklore. It was prophesied that the Talking Cross revolts, part of the Maya Caste War, 1847 to 1901, would include an agreement between the rebels and the governor of the ruins, a reference to the mythical Itzar king mentioned in Chilambalam's books. As a result, Chichen Itza was never forgotten by the Yucatec Mayans. Even though Chichen Itza declined, it remained part of the sacred landscape and became a folklore landscape. Regardless of the reasons for the revolt against Chichen, bitterness had been growing for some time. In 1221, Hunak Cheel, the founder of the Copán dynasty, a leader and spark of a revolt in the name of patriotism, founded the smaller cities and towns built in the old Puuc style. Hunak Cheel Kawich, an ethnic Mayan general who conquered Chichen Itza, founded the family. The Copán lineage had initially dominated the post-Chichen landscape and founded Mayapan. Hunak Cheel was captured during the conflict and eventually sacrificed to Chak in a cenote outside the city. But he survived and emerged the next day with a prophecy from Chak himself. Upon his prediction coming true, he was appointed by Chichen Itza's rulers to become the ruler of Mayapan, which at that time was officially under the authority of Ar-Mex-Cook, Chichen Itza's titular ruler. The Itzayes, as the city's elites were called, may have thought this would remove Ar-Mex-Cook from an influential role in their city's politics, but they were grossly mistaken. Hunak Cheel conquered Chichen Itza by forming an alliance with Uxmal, another important Chichen Itza tribute city. Mayapan was established as the capital of a new confederation including Mayapan, Uxmal, and Chichen Itza, without the Ar-Mex-Cook and the Itzayes councillors, following this stunning victory. Recent archaeology shows that Mayapan was once a settlement, which makes sense because its water sources would have allowed for agriculture. But the previous settlement was undoubtedly not a walled city or a capital. Eventually the Itzayes would flee the Yucatán entirely, retreating to Lake Petén Itzá in Guatemala, where their leaders would develop another city, Tayasal, the last Mayan city to fall to the Spaniards. Meanwhile, the political entity that emerged in the Yucatán, the League of Mayapan, was based on the system of multepal, joint rule, devised by Chichen Itza. This relative equality between city-states in the League gave structure to the Kokomshu rivalry. Traditional texts, particularly the Chilambalam manuscript, describe Ar-Mex-Cook and Hunak Cheel as Itzayes, the ruling ethnic group of Chichen Itza. However, one might be tempted to view the conquest of Hunak Cheel as an example of indigenous resistance against foreigners. Except for Uxmal, all the cities and towns allied with Hunak Cheel were located around the Puuc Hills, a center of political and artistic power before Chichen Itza rose. A distinctive cultural element of Chichen Itza in the Mayan landscape was its cosmopolitan nature, and it was undoubtedly associated with foreign ideas and foreign power during its time, perhaps even seen as an invasion. Hunak Cheel's conquest of the city and power transfer to Mayapan and its Puuc allies might have been seen as a return to traditional values and power structures. In addition to textual evidence, this thesis explores several other areas. Hunak Cheel replaced the Toltec-inspired rulers of Chichen Itza with a dynastic system led by his family, the Cocomes. Like pre-Chichen classic Mayan polities like Tikal, which may have been considered a Mayan golden age by the post-classic Yucatecans. A second reason for this revival is that in Mayapan, there was a revival of a pre-Chichen architectural style called Puuc style, and carved stones called stelae, in a distinctive traditional style called katun ending. Last, the alliance sought Uxmal, a city famous even today for its Puuc style, and once a dominant power before Chichen. Uxmal was probably a shadow of its former glory, since no significant construction had occurred there since Chichen Itza rose. Furthermore, it seems that the Cocomes were never fully confident in their power, perhaps initially due to their fears of the Itzayes returning to power at Chichen. Therefore, instead of the sprawling cities like Chichen or Coba, another contemporary city to the east, they built a densely packed walled city, a first in Maya history. The Chilam Balam describes Mayapan as the fortress. Such a significant outlay of wealth needed to construct the walled city would not have been undertaken lightly, suggesting the rulers had profound long-term anxiety. Tutul Xiu, one of the Kokom's most significant rivals, was based in Mani, one of Hunak Chil's original allied towns, which was listed in Chilambalam as one of the Xiu's cities. Xiu were the original rulers of Uxmal, the last flowering of the classic Mayan civilization, and built upon the Puug aesthetic. Uxmal reached its zenith under Lord Chak, the only ruler commemorated in stone. As a result of Chak's control over Uxmal, previously governed by an elite council, the city became a mighty military power between 875 and 900 CE. In addition to a central pyramid called the Temple of the Magician, Uxmal expanded rapidly during the reign of Chak and his immediate successors. Temples in this region worshipped the rain god Chak. However, the glory days were short-lived, and the grand palaces and temples were abandoned by 925 CE. While it appears that the city was not wholly abandoned, it was inhabited by Hunak Seal 300 years later. It was ultimately overtaken by Chichen in its position as a regional powerhouse. During Hunak Seal's rise to power in the 1220s, Uxmal was associated with the powerful Xiu family. The Xiu family claimed the site and considered the abandoned temples their own until the Spanish conquest, although there is no direct textual connection between them. The 13th century apparently drove them out of the city, leading them to establish Mani, a much smaller town. Mani still houses the first Franciscan mission in the region today. Therefore, the Kokomes may have represented the new order founded by the charismatic and divinely inspired Hunak Chil. In contrast, the Xiu may have described the old order originating in Uxmal and traced its history back centuries to Lord Chak, the last of the classic Mayan kings and a towering historical figure to rival Hunak Chil. It took nearly 2 centuries for the Hyos to depose their rivals and become the most powerful family in the region, after the fall of Mayapan in 1441 CE. Despite the walls of the conquest, the city's conquest demonstrates that Itzar's fear was well-founded, and that Xiu's fear took its place. It seems the Xius gained a lesson from the escape of the Itzais from Chichen when they butchered the Kokoms and exiled their sole survivor, who was absent during the attack, obliterating their rivalry in one blow. Spanish allies justified their actions. The governing Kokom began coveting riches, and, to that end, negotiated with the Aztec garrisons in Tabasco and Xicalango that they would control the city. Through his oppression and enslavement of people with low incomes, he introduced Mexicans to Mayapan. This evil led to using arms for self-defense, ensuring that not everyone was forced into servitude. In other sections of the chronicles, the Kokom repeatedly mention using Mexican mercenaries to defend themselves. Despite building walls and importing foreign mercenaries, the Kokom struggled long before their fall against the Sayus. The leaders of other cities then joined Tutul Xiu, a patriotic man like his ancestors, and plotted to kill the Kokom. This explanation, like any post-facto justification of war, should be viewed with caution. At the same time, they killed all his sons except the absent one. They looted his home and took possession of everything inside, including cacao and other fruits, asserting that they had made up for their losses. However, despite Sius's ambitions to dominate the region, it was not a Tsiu-dominated confederacy centered on Mani after Mayapan. Instead, it fractured into small warring statelets until the arrival of the Spanish, who found no unified resistance in the region. As a last attempt at dominance, the Sius quickly allied with the Spanish, inviting the Franciscans to live in Mani. As with all indigenous elites in Mesoamerica, their plans failed, and they were eventually dispossessed and replaced by Spaniards. In contrast to the sprawling metropolises of the classic period, Mayapan was a dense city. Approximately 4,000 buildings occupied its 4.2 square kilometers, 1.5 square miles area, with original estimates of over 10,000 residents revised to 15,000 to 17,000. It was a big town after Chichen in the Mayan post-classic period, with walls, temples, plazas, palaces and markets that one would expect in a power base. The layout of the city walls mimics the rough outline of a pickaxe head. The blade of the pickaxe faces west and southwest, while the pick extends northeast. Pickaxe's axe blade was located near the city's center in the western third. The walls of Mayapan lie in ruins. The central plaza was in the center of the blade, where the most important buildings were found, including palaces, major plazas, temples, and other ritual structures. The Temple of Kukulkan is the most essential structure on the south side of the central plaza. In addition to its fame, it is a smaller version of Chichen Itza's famous Castillo, a temple to Kukulkan. This same plaza also has the second tallest pyramid, known as the Crematorio or Crematorium. And across the plaza is another famous Chichen structure, the Templo Redondo, which mimics the celestial snail observatory in the larger city. As the city's center, it would have been a daily hub for commerce, governance, and socialization, as well as a place for the public to watch pyramid ceremonies. Several artisans' workshops surrounded the plaza, but the palaces of the city's most powerful families were directly to the east and west of them. Indeed, the Copán and Xiao had mansions on this site, but there is no evidence they held a mini-estate in the town, though one can imagine the dominant Copán in an enormous palace directly west of the plaza. In addition to the 4 to 5 courts found, there are residential neighborhoods east of the plaza, including smaller courts presumably owned by less affluent people. Given this knowledge, many envision these palaces serving as city homes for families with larger estates elsewhere in the Yucatán. In European capitals, there was a courtly season when these houses were filled, and the social rounds and politics were intense, followed by a period when the families retired to their ancestral homes. The League of Mayapan Confederacy that emerged from Hunak Seal's revolution included a council of leaders dominated by a few families. The city's principal marketplace occupied a sprawling area to the north of this residential zone, close to the north wall and the top of the axe head. The market was located on the north side of the main highway, which led to the main plaza and the south and southeast gates. Milpas, the local term for corn and vegetables, were inside the walls despite the settlement's density. Near the fortifications are 14 agricultural fields within the walls and 14 in the immediate vicinity. As a result of these areas, the city may have been able to withstand sieges longer, and they may have also served as truck gardens, supplying the city's market with fresh food every day. In addition to the grand temples at its center, the city boasted temple complexes scattered throughout its grounds. Excavations in the northeast have discovered the Itzmalchen ceremonial group, which consists of a pyramid temple and 3 priests' buildings, flanking a small plaza with a cenote, sinkhole well, in the center. Additionally, a mass grave contains the remains of 18 elite temple patrons. While Mayapan attracts tourists, its defensive walls are the most defining feature of the Maya. Diego de Landa, the Spanish chronicler, observed that the Maya called the city Ichpa, within the fortifications, instead of Mayapan. This walled city was the only fortified town on the eastern shore of the Yucatán, which is extremely popular among tourists in Cancun, emphasizing the significance of these walls for the city's place in Mayan imagination. Estimates put the wall's length at 9 kilometers, over 5.5 miles, their thickness at 10 to 15 feet and their height at over 6 feet. 12 gates guarded the walls, and there were 7 significant entrances with vaulted chambers. The gates were arranged around the walls systematically. There are temples inside 3 gates, and cenotes are sometimes close to them. Gates were likely placed to facilitate long-distance trade, access to fields for farmers living within the walls. and similar economic activities like harvesting firewood and hunting. Only a portion of these gates remained active at any given time, according to archaeologists' belief. The Xiu armies may have blocked these gates to prevent their entrance during their final days. As Chichen Itza before it, Mayapan was a cosmopolitan city populated by nobility and foreigners, because it inherited the remnants of Chichen Itza's trade empire, including its ports and trade routes into Honduras and central Mexico. Many Mexican mercenaries lived in the city in its last years, and the city's elite adopted many Mexican religious and courtly traditions. Consequently, visitors from smaller hinterland towns would have found the fortress an exciting place to visit, with exotic goods, religions, and people to encounter. Even though the Yucatecans, by and large, did not practice the classical Mayan tradition of divine kingship, a rigid caste system was maintained in both the city and the outlying towns that preceded and survived it. No one was unaware that Mayapan's nobility also possessed palaces of varying sizes in the city. Even though the lavishness of the noble lifestyle probably declined after the abandonment of Mayapan, the Spanish left an impression. They often spend all they have earned by several days of trading on one banquet. In the feasts of the chiefs and leading men, each guest is obliged to return an invitation to their host. Each guest is given a roast fowl and cacao and drinks in abundance. And after the banquet, the welcomer gives each a small mantle to wear. Aside from jesters who performed with outstanding skill, musicians played wooden drums, tortoise rattles, bone whistles, conch shells, and reed flutes during the feasts. Single-gender groups often danced with these musicians. Colomche, palisade of sticks, involved large circles of dancers moving in time to drums while two dancers tossed reed sticks at each other and caught them with grace. Approximately 800 dancers carried flags during another dance that lasted the entire day, eating and drinking while dancing to the music. In contrast, the commoners had more restrained festivals, such as when they married their children or celebrated their ancestors' deeds. Mayapan also hosted elaborate religious and courtly performances in addition to these openly festive occasions. At essential times, worshippers sacrificed the lives of captured prisoners purchased by elite families, in place of their own blood. Spanish scholars primarily focused on recording details of blood sacrifice and destroying other religious texts, so researchers have only a rough idea of how the ceremony went. The Rabinal Achi Ballet of the Guatemala Highlands offers a glimpse into the world of this colorful pageantry. In the village of Cajub, performers dress up in incredible masked costumes to portray ancient dynasties and recreate historical events dramatically. The performers and musicians inherit their positions, passing down this form of patrimony orally from generation to generation. Scholars speculate that similar dramas, perhaps depicting the lives of figures like Lord Chark or Hunak Teal, played an essential role in the life of the Highlanders of Guatemala. In addition to legitimizing the leadership roles of the descendants of the figures depicted, they would have explained the city's unique characteristics to the general public. Mayapan's peak was marked by a constant flow of ritual offerings, historical dance dramas, and reciprocal noble feasts. In addition to the formal attire, body decoration, jewelry, and the different foods and drinks consumed, they would have supported an entire economy of craftspeople. A slave market may also have existed, where wealthy families could purchase military prisoners for service in their homes and estates or as offerings to the gods. Mayan commoners wore relatively simple clothing in the Yucatán because of its warm climate and lack of need for elaborate clothing. According to Diego de Landa, men wore little more than a breechcloth, a cotton belt with a strip of cloth tucked into its front, passed between the legs, and tucked into its back so that its ends hung down. Embroidery or colorful feathers often embellished these. The women wore similarly decorated square cotton mantles. In this period, Mayan women wore ponchos like the huipils they wear today. They wore deerskin sandals or hemp sandals on their feet. A lack of complicated outfits was compensated for with body modification and temporary decorations, such as piercings, tattoos, filed teeth, and coiffures as fine as those of the most coquettish Spanish women. The basic outfits of the elites were the same, though they added elaborate headdresses and jewelry. Comparisons with Mayan books and surviving frescoes have confirmed this description. Since social classes and castes dressed similarly, there was likely a subtle difference between the wealthy and the poor. Attempts at reconstruction will always be conjectural, but beautiful and evocative ones can inspire. Various Mayan communities in modern Chichicastenango are characterized by their distinctive, colorful woven styles, creating a riot of color that can be read by knowledgeable actors. And the Mayapan market may have been no different. Considering the city's extensive trade routes, it is likely that its more OK attire incorporated rare imported goods, such as turquoise from the modern-day American Southwest deserts. Various outfits would have been appropriate for other social and labor contexts and weather conditions. An agricultural belt surrounded the city, in addition to the milpa gardens. Due to these factors, most of the city's food sources were sourced locally. Outside the Andes, Native Americans didn't have beasts of burden, so transporting even dried corn over long distances would have been inefficient, since the bearers would need to eat more than they carried. Consequently, the immediate surroundings of Mesoamerican cities, akin to an agricultural island around a fixed water source, largely limited their growth. Therefore, growth typically occurred by conquering other city islands or affiliating them with a powerful confederacy, as in Mayapans. The city produced two types of foods, those produced locally and those imported by trade, which the elites used for ceremonial occasions. Corn grown in the milpas dominated the diet of both rich and poor, male and female. Contemporary Yucatecan Maya also heavily used corn in tortillas, tamales, and drinks, although the diet was relatively more varied than in the classic period, when the population pressures forced the Maya to rely almost entirely on corn. In ruins, archaeologists have found a disproportionate number of tall Stanley cactus, which are believed to have been planted by the ancients for their edible fruit and ability to produce arrow shafts from their flesh. Also consumed by the Mayans were chili peppers, squash, runner beans, peanuts, tomatoes, avocado, vanilla, sunflowers, and fruits such as sapote and papaya. It would have been a rich diet in the hands of trained chefs. People in the city ate white-tailed deer, iguanas, peccaries, brocket deer, and domesticated animals like turkeys and dogs. Due to a lack of domestic animals, there are fewer domesticated species in the Americas than in the Old World. Aside from dogs and turkeys, only South American animals were present, such as llamas, alpacas, guinea pigs, and Muscovy ducks. The city also imported exotic meats and seafood, serving them to leaders and dog meat. According to some studies, the amount of white-tailed deer consumed within Mayapan exceeded what should have been available for regular hunting. Therefore, some have speculated that the locals created an enclosed deer park or manipulated the nearby forest to encourage deer. Deer meat and bones were essential to trade goods, and white-tailed deer was considered a high-status food. Venison's symbolic importance was further enhanced by the ritual disposal of its skulls. While early studies of Mayapan focused on the ceremonial center and the number of buildings within the walls, more recent research has shown that while the formal city ended at the gates, the economy and social world of the city extended beyond it. Several informal settlements were based around colonnaded customs buildings near the major gates on the agricultural island that supported the town beyond its walls. One in the southwest, one in the north, one in the south, and one in the east, southeast, and northeast. As the highways leading up to the gates taper off past 500 meters from the walls, these settlements appear to have been built along them. A small market was along the southern highway, the only one discovered outside the primary market in the city's north. There is no clear explanation for why this market existed, but it is possible that merchants avoided gate taxes and trading rules by locating it outside the city's gates. In that case, It is hard to understand why the authorities in Mayapan would allow this market to exist. But whatever the reason, the market appears to have had a notable exception. A small settlement outside the 500-meter band was the only exception. The city's surrounding landscape was dotted with sacred cenotes and sinkholes that provided access to underground water sources. It was believed that cenotes were sacred spaces that enabled interaction with the holy realm of the gods. This is why Hunakchil was sacrificed by being thrown into a cenote, and why he was considered to have been touched by Chayak when he emerged from the cenote alive. Despite the lush nature of the Yucatán jungle, it is akin to a desert for agriculturalists. No surface water sources exist, so all hydration must come from underground sources. The area around the city contained at least 100 documented holes, but not all were usable for agriculture. Researchers have begun to explore Mayapan's cenotes, which include ceramics, burials, and other ritual activities. Over 20 bodies have also been found in them. It is unlikely that someone approaching the city at its height would have seen the subterranean cenotes or taken notice of the small market town to the south. But the milpas and the attendant farms would have dominated the immediate area surrounding the city. Today, it's challenging to imagine Mayapan surrounded by jungle, but recent work in the Mayapan Periphery Project has revealed that the town was surrounded by extensive agricultural and settlement areas, with farmers living just outside the walls. In the agricultural fields, corn likely grew alongside other crops, while livestock production in the north probably catered to semi-domesticated white-tailed deer. Additionally, Diego de Landa described rural Yucatecans' daily lives post-Mayapan. His text, Yucatán Before and After the Conquest, describes a whitewashed wooden home with a steeply pitched roof. Their neighbors helped them work in their own fields, as well as the areas of local elites. Most of their protein came from hunting and growing corn, maize, chili peppers, and other vegetables in these milpas. Forests of the Yucatán would eventually swallow the city's ruins beyond the milpas. Since the Mayans liked to plant milpas in the woods, within walking distance, wherever fertility and water made agriculture possible, the transition from field to forest would not have been immediate. Moreover, the nearby forests would have resembled a managed landscape rather than a wild one, with city dwellers utilizing them extensively for fantastic products. In addition to white-tailed deer, these included wood for cooking, honey from stingless Yucatecan bees, and other meats like peccary, as well as a variety of wild vegetables, fruits, and tubers. As a major capital would expect, Mayapan had a rich and varied religious life. Temples dotted the city as a place for religious innovation and an older tradition. As a technique for contacting the gods, Chen Mul's residents developed new ritual objects around 1300 or 1325, such as an effigy incense burner using copal incense. A new way of interacting with the Mayan deities is a crucial spiritual development. But the shifting roles of two key gods also show how the religion in the city evolved. Kukulkan, a god imported from the Toltecs via Chichen Itza, and Chaak, a Mayan god, are notable examples. Despite losing many details, Mayapan and Chichen Itza seemed closely linked to political currents. There had long been a well-organized and elaborate religious world among the Mayas. The Mayans had several religious characteristics that stemmed from a pan-Mesoamerican religious tradition, including pyramidal temple worship, blood sacrifices, and polytheism. Still, they retained much that made them distinct, much as Christianity, Judaism, and Islam share similar features but retain their own distinctive character. The Mayan deity Chaak, also spelled Chak or Chaak, was the deity of rain, fertility, agriculture, thunder, and storms. Known as a protector of humanity, Chaak taught his worshippers how to grow crops. His storms were also announced by frogs, whose croaks were said to be his servants. The Mayan religious tradition in the Yucatán traditionally depicted Chaak as having fangs and an upturned proboscis. Still, he evolved into one of the Bakabs, one of 4 protective deities associated with the cardinal points of the compass, with Chaak representing the east. Given Yucatan agriculture's notoriously tricky conditions, it's easy to understand why a rain deity would be so important. Farmers must rely on rain and subsurface water from cenotes. Puke city-states became known for their temples lavishly decorated with stone Chaak masks in this context. And Uxmal is especially renowned for its temples decorated with Chaak masks. Despite the ruins of the Puke cities in northern Yucatan, traditional H-men priests continue to venerate the god Chaak. H-men made offerings of pigs to Chaak at the ruins of Cobar and Merida, as well as Catholic saints, but explained that venison was used, probably like ancient Mayapan offerings. Chichen Itza's dominance in the Yucatan fundamentally changed the Chaak-centered religious life of the Puke. Among other cultural elements imported from central Mexico were cults dedicated to Kukulkan, a god worshipped by the Toltecs. In this era, the sovereign feathered serpent god Kukulkan became popular, and Chichen Itza became a center of pilgrimage and worship. While the men from Yucatan continue to revere Chaak, the last non-Christianized Mayan group, the Lacandan of Chiapas, continues to worship Kukulkan, and they live in an area that is far from any other Mayan region. In 1492, the Kukulkan cult, which covered all of Mesoamerica, could have been considered one of the world's greatest proselytizing faiths, comparable to Christianity or Buddhism. Despite Kukulkan's dominance, the Mayans continued to revere Chaak and their previous pantheon, which nobody in the region considered abnormal. Among the contemporary Aztec peoples, Kukulkan's local version, Quetzalcoatl, is worshipped along with the rain god Tlaloc, the war god Huitzilopochtli, and others. However, there is some confusion regarding the roles of these 2 gods during the Mayapan period and in post-Chichen political and religious domains. Chaak, on the one hand, was undoubtedly at the center of the city's foundation, since Hunachtel received a vision from Chaak directly in a sacred cenote at Chichen, and the legitimacy of the Cocom family was partly built on this divine blessing. In addition to recruiting Uxmal, they emulated its Puke style, using Chaak masks as one of the dominant decorations for the city and its buildings. Despite this, Kukulkan worship seems to have retained its central place in Yucatecan religious life. The plumed serpent, a smaller version of the massive Castillo in Chichen Itza, was the focus of the most incredible temple in Mayapan. During this time, the temple to the wind. God Kukulkan dominated Tulum, a city founded during this period. The Xiu, whose power was based on Uxmal's legacy, worshipped Kukulkan, and when the Spanish arrived, they were well known for their annual festivals to the god, during which their tribute states offered offerings to the temples in Man. According to the Spanish, 5 days of fasting and a spectacular procession culminated in the descent of the god Kukulkan himself on the festival's final day. Additionally, Xiu allies have passed down a curious story about the founding of Mayapan. As told to Diego de Landa by Xiu allies, the city was actually founded by Kukulkan, who first founded Chichen Itza, then moved to Mayapan, where he ruled until returning to Mexico. Though Landa speaks Yucatecan fluently, there may be some confusion here. The high priest of Kukulkan was also known as Kukulkan. This means that once Mayapan replaced Chichen as the regional capital, the high priest moved to the new temple. Only after this did the Cocomes gain power, he says. Retrospectively, the Xiu family has a terrible legacy of destruction to account for. Together with the Cocomes, they toppled the Itzais and brought Chichen Itza to its knees, and they rode in the vanguard of the alliance that eventually destroyed the Cocomes and Mayapan. There is no guarantee that the Sius obliterated Mayapan, but they looted the city, vandalized certain artifacts, and moved whatever instruments of power they could back to Mani. Despite their victory in 1441, Recent archaeology has revealed that the citadel's remaining families fled due to a plague. They must also bear the destruction that followed the city's fall and the eventual fateful alliance with the Spanish. Mayapan's fall immediately shattered the League of Mayapan and the city. Instead of transferring authority to Mani, the Xiu once again became one family among many who sought power within the region. The fact that they tried to consolidate power does not mean they didn't try to shrink it. Kukulkan's most prominent festival was held annually in Mani after the Spanish arrived, possibly due to the priesthood of Kukulkan being transferred from Chichen to Xiu 2 centuries earlier. The century between Mayapan's sack in 1441 and the Spanish conquest of the region in 1542 was dark for the Yucatecans, as their former unity disintegrated into 16 rival statelets, each with a ritual center that was a glorified town. The Yucatecans never forgot Mayapan, Uxmal, and Chichen Itza, but they largely abandoned them and began their long conversion back into the jungle. The priests of Uxmal and Chichen likely lived alone in ruins, much like those ecclesiastical buildings surrounding Rome during the Middle Ages. Spanish settlers arrived in this balkanized landscape. Charles C. Mann described a master narrative about the conquest in his seminal book, 1491, New Discoveries of the Americas Before Columbus, which was shaped by the fact that indigenous groups throughout the Americas were decimated and conquered by Europeans. Historical, archaeological, and anthropological studies of encounters between indigenous people and Europeans created a master narrative. Mann argues that the conquest always happened after two things: widespread plagues and Europeans taking advantage of divisions within the indigenous peoples. The Yucatan followed this model, unsurprisingly. While Hernán Cortés, the conqueror of the Aztec Empire, visited the Mayan coastline on his journey to Mexico, the Spanish initially ignored the tiny Yucatecan statelets because they didn't seem to offer any fabulous prizes. After conquering the Aztecs, the Oaxacan Mixtecs, and the Zapotecs, the Spanish returned to the Yucatan. Indigenous peoples in Chiapas, however, put up strong resistance and, in some ways, have never been completely subjugated. Francisco de Montejo, senior and junior, led the first expedition to the Yucatan. In 1528 and 1535, they invaded Mayan lands. In 1540, they established a fortified coastal base in Campeche, and only after taking Mani in 1542 and allying with the Xiu did they succeed in their interior campaign. By 1546, they had conquered a Yucatecan polity. 1697 marked the end of the last independent Mayan state, the highland Itza stronghold of Tayasal. The Xius may have wondered why they allied with a foreign power that had brought down the mighty Aztec Empire. Xiu elites, for example, recognized the Spanish power but exploited it to their advantage. After Mayapan fell, the Xiu felt deeply resentful of their inability to consolidate their control over Yucatan. It was likely that the alliance between the Xius and the Spanish provided the opening the de Montejos had been seeking for years, and it was equally successful for the Xius, as it allowed them to achieve a degree of dominance they had only dreamed of before. Despite breaking the political and military power of the Yucatecan statelets, the de Montejo family of conquistadores did not disrupt Chichen Puc culture. In 1549, the first wave of Franciscan missionaries sent to the Yucatan region included Diego de Landa. It would happen later when Diego de Landa Calderón, 1524 to 1579, arrived in the Yucatan. Before his tenure, the Spanish crown had granted the Franciscans a spiritual monopoly over the Yucatan, and de Landa pursued two objectives. They not only converted the Maya but also consolidated Franciscan power. This is a portrait of Diego de Landa Calderón, Upon conquering the Yucatán, de Landa set up mission posts, converted locals, and consolidated his power with the Shu. Yet, it wasn't until 1562 that de Landa became one of the most notorious book burners and destroyers of religious tradition in human history. By this year, de Landa realized that most of the conversions he had made had been false, and the Maya were still secretly worshipping their own gods, even his closest allies. In a rage at the betrayal of his life's work, he and his aides scoured Yucatán for books, codices, relics, and ritual implements, hauling them to the Shu town of Mani. An auto da fe is a public act of penance that involves gathering all the assembled objects together and burning them simultaneously. We found a lot of books in these characters, and since they contained nothing other than beliefs and lies of the devil, we burned them all, which they, the Maya, regretted to an amazing extent and caused them much suffering. It was not unusual for this event to involve certain aspects. For some time, the Spanish burned accused witches at these events, and the Catholic Church burned religious objects in Mexico, Peru, Brazil, and Goa. The bonfire of the vanities occurred in Florence, Italy in 1497, when a Dominican priest named Girolamo Savonarola convinced followers to burn objects associated with sin, like mirrors, fine clothing, gambling objects, books, secular music, and art. Despite those predecessors, de Landa's actions were shocking and heartbreaking, shattering centuries of religious, political, legal, poetic, and artistic tradition. More destruction occurred than Cortez's defeat of the Aztec court or the sack of Rome by the Vandals left substantial writings behind. Even de Landa's contemporaries deemed his actions out of character. The area's bishop sent him back to Spain for trial for exceeding his authority. A few years before his trial, he wrote the book Relación de las Cosas de Yucatán, rough translation, Yucatán before and after the conquest, describing the history and language, livelihoods and religion of the Maya and defending his actions. 1569, the court found him innocent, and in 1571 he returned to Yucatán as a bishop. Even though de Landa could not fully eradicate the heresies and apostasies that he saw under every rock, a distinctively Mayan form of religion exists to this day. He and his contemporaries were very effective in eradicating every element of the Mayan elite and court life, so that what is known of the pre-Columbian period today comes mainly from their own writings, or what can be gathered from shattered ruins. As a result, the cultural tradition began in Puke cities, matured in Uxmal, rose to glory in Chichen Itza, regrouped after the Toltec fall behind the walls of Mayapan, and survived even that refuge in the small Yucatecan states, finally ending in the fires of Mani. Despite losing their kings, priests, and cities, the Maya did not disappear. Instead, they retreated into the jungle, where they remain today. English-speaking archaeologists and historians discovered the Mayan culture in the mid-19th century, after de Landa and other Spaniards brought their writings to an English-speaking public interested in emerging archaeology. John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood, Americans and Englishmen, launched a search for the city and other Yucatecan ruins. Just before the 1847 caste war in the Yucatán, Stephens and Catherwood's book Incidents of Travel in Yucatán, 1841, captured European and Euro-American imaginations. It was a time of grand expeditions and public fascination with lost cities, and the book became a bestseller. Catherwood's images of the ruins were renowned for their intricate detail and beauty. Scholars still use them to study elements of buildings that have eroded since publication a century and a half ago. When the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 1920 broke out, the area became inaccessible again until the end of the war in 1901. After the revolution, a new government led by the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI, established a different relationship with the pre-Columbian past. This government viewed modern-day Mexico as a mestizo state, a nation that was equal parts Spanish and indigenous. Pre-Columbian ruins in Mexico were transformed from crumbling heathen relics, considered best left to looters and the dead, into national pride and identity symbols. A new interest in Chichén Itzá culminated in a flurry of archaeological excavations, a significant restoration of the jungle-covered El Castillo pyramid, and a restoration of the nearby Temple of Warriors by the Carnegie Institution during the 1920s and 1930s. The government sponsored another excavation on Castillo's side in the 1930s. The two earlier pyramids buried beneath its surface were discovered during that excavation. In the 1950s, excavations and restorations impressively dredged the sacred cenote. The ruins of Chichén Itzá are protected by a 1972 law which is referred to in English as the Federal Law on Monuments and Archaeological, Artistic and Historic Zones. In 1986, the President declared the ruins an archaeological monument, which placed the site under the National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, management in Mexico City. In 1987, Yucatán, where the ruins are located, created a unique board of units of cultural and tourism services to oversee the conservation and tourist promotion of all of its significant archaeological sites. In 1988, Mexico requested that Chichén Itzá be included on the list of World Heritage Sites. This list catalogues world history, culture, and the Earth's most precious natural locations, such as the Taj Mahal and Versailles. Only the second group of sites submitted for inscription by the Mexican government indicates the importance of the site to the Mexican people. Due to this promotion and the site's photogenic ruins, Chichén Itzá has become one of the region's premier tourist attractions, attracting between 3,500 and 8,000 visitors daily. Mexicans have highly regarded Chichén Itzá since the 1920 revolution, making it more than just a tourist attraction. It has been a stand-in for Mexico's tourism campaign for years because of El Castillo's splendor. In 2007, the new Seven Wonders Foundation launched an international contest in which the public voted on a new list of 7 wonders of the world. The winners achieved their status partly through public campaigns, typically government-sponsored, and Mexicans voted in droves for Chichén Itzá, putting it ahead of Mexico's other impressive ruins. Ironically, today, this love is the greatest threat to the site's conservation. Many structures reconstructed from stone remain relatively fragile. In 2006, visitors were no longer allowed to climb the Castillo, and in 2011, INA asked the increased number of visitors to remain off the structures and avoid other activities that may damage the site. Acid rain is also posing an increasing threat to Castillo. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, elaborate carvings were preserved by Frederick Catherwood, but they decomposed rapidly due to increased acidity in the rain throughout the Yucatán Peninsula. These buildings are built of limestone, like the peninsula, which is particularly prone to erosion. As a result, details are disappearing from their facades permanently. For instance, by the late 1980s, a black crust of acid deposits covered the Grand Ball Court in the city. A growing conflict over who controls the ruins poses the final challenge to the ruins today. The government and most mestizos in central Mexico began to view the ancient ruins as examples of shared national heritage that should be protected after the Mexican Revolution. Nevertheless, the local Maya believe these sites were not built by mestizos, who, if they have indigenous ancestry, tend to descend from groups like the Aztecs from central Mexico, but rather by their ancestors. Even though INAA recognizes this unique relationship by allowing Maya to enter the ruins free of charge, the locals are pushing for more benefits. There has been a conflict over whether, how many, and where Maya artisans can sell their handicrafts to tourists at Chichén Itzá. And this reached its peak in 2006, when Subcomandante Marcos, spokesman for the Zapatista Revolutionary Group, EZLN, visited the site. Mayan communities in Chiapas sent Marcos to Yucatán after he reached out to his Yucatecan cousins. Due to the increasingly contested nature of this space, a world-renowned Mayan revolutionary will visit over a debate regarding vendors' rights. Here is Chichen Itza as we begin the new millennium. Despite being one of the most famous archaeological sites in the Mayan heartland, Mayapan was overshadowed by more famous sites such as Tikal, Calakmul, Uxmal, and Chichen Itza. However, Ralph Paton conducted the first severe excavation at the site in 1938 for the Carnegie Institution. Scholars, if not the general public, increasingly understand this proud and ancient city despite its weathered exterior. As indigenous peoples and national governments grapple over control, interpretation, and profit of heritage sites, the site also finds itself in the crosshairs of a struggle over Mexico's patrimony. Several other Carnegie expeditions followed after World War II, mapping all the major structures within the walls and examining the central plaza buildings in detail. Despite archaeologists' examinations of these central buildings, most of the city's ruins remain in the hands of private Mayan farmers. It was not until 1996 that the National Institute of Anthropology and History, INAH, began restoring the site and making it accessible to tourists. A research center has been established in the area since the early 21st century, including the economic fundamentals of the Mayapan project of the State University of New York at Albany.